请主礼嘉宾移步到舞台上就位。
他们是香港特别行政区后任行政长官李家超先生 ，Mr. John Lee Ka-chiu, Chief Executive Designate of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region。
外交部驻港特派员公署特派员刘光源先生 ，Mr. 刘光源 ，Commissioner of the Commissioner's Office of China's Foreign Ministry in the Hong Kong SAR。
紫荆文化集团董事长毛超峰先生 ，Mr. 毛超峰 ，Chairman of Bahinier Culture Group。
香港大学校长张翔先生 ，Mr. 张翔 ，President of the University of Hong Kong。
全国人大常委会香港基本法委员会副主任谭慧珠女士 ，Mrs. Maria Tan Wai Chu, Deputy Director of the Hong Kong SAR Basic Law Committee of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress。让我们以热烈掌声对各位嘉宾的到来表示热烈欢迎。
以及麻烦台上的各位主礼嘉宾看向前方，让我们一起合影留念一张。
好，我们再有请站在第二排的2位主礼嘉宾上台，他们是中国工商银行亚洲主席兼执行董事高明女士 ，Mrs. 高明 ，Chairman and Executive Director of Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Asia。
以及招商局集团有限公司董事会秘书、总经理助理楚中生先生 ，Mr. 楚中生 ，Assistant President of the China Merchants Group Limited。
香港中资企业协会总裁张夏令先生 ，Mr. 张夏令 ，President of the Hong Kong Chinese Enterprises Association。好，请各位主礼嘉宾合影留念。接下来就进入我们一个非常重要的亮灯环节。
我想有请第一排的各位主礼嘉宾，请您伸出手，放到您面前的亮灯装置上面。稍后我们会一起倒数3、2、1，请您一起按下您面前的装置。
Please put your hand on the starter and press it after we say 3, 2, 1。那么准备好了吗？下面我们开始亮灯仪式，让我们一起倒数3、2、1。
谢谢各位为香港回归25周年紫荆文化国际论坛亮灯。
好的，非常感谢各位嘉宾，请各位嘉宾入席就坐。
Please take your seats, please。谢谢各位嘉宾。
接下来，紫荆文化国际论坛“一国两制”的成就与展望正式开始。
下面我们将进入论坛的开幕式环节，让我们有请开幕式主持人紫荆文化集团总经理文宏武先生。
Now we proceed to the opening ceremony of the forum. Let us welcome our host of the opening ceremony, Mr. 文宏武, General Manager of Bahinier Culture Group.
尊敬的各位领导、各位来宾、媒体的朋友们、女士们、先生们，大家上午好。再过半个月，我们将迎来香港回归祖国25周年。在这个重要时刻，紫荆文化集团举办香港回归祖国25周年紫荆文化国际论坛，以“一国两制的成就与展望”为主题，邀请中外嘉宾回顾总结“一国两制”实践的宝贵经验和丰硕成果，展望香港在由治及兴进程中的发展机遇和光明前景。首先，有请本次活动的主办机构紫荆文化集团董事长毛超峰先生致欢迎词，大家掌声欢迎。
First of all, we are pleased to have Mr. Mao Chaofeng, Chairman of Bahinier Culture Group, to give us a welcome speech.
尊敬的林郑月娥行政长官、李家超后任行政长官、刘光源特派员、谭慧珠副主任、张翔校长、各位嘉宾、女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家上午好。致辞庆祝香港回归祖国 25周年之际，来自世界各地的专家学者和香港各界人士齐聚湘江之畔，参加紫荆文化国际论坛，共同回顾“一国两制”在香港的生动实践和伟大成就，一起展望香港的发展前景和美好未来。在此，请允许我代表主办方，向与会的专家学者、嘉宾朋友们表示热烈的欢迎和衷心的感谢。25年来，香港虽然历经风雨，但“一国两制”的根基更加牢固，“一国两制”事业的前景更加光明。特别是随着香港国安法和新的选举制度的落地，爱国者治港的原则得到全面落实，香港已实现由乱到治的重大转变，正迈向由治及兴的崭新阶段。一国两制是中国共产党的伟大创举，为维护世界和平与发展、构建人类命运共同体做出了独特的贡献，得到了国际社会的广泛赞誉。我们高兴地看到，国际上越来越多的专家学者在研究“一国两制”，越来越多的媒体舆论在关注“一国两制”，越来越多的商界人士在看好“一国两制”。加拿大菲萨研究所连续多年将香港评为全球最自由的经济体。世界银行将香港营商便利程度列为全球的第3位。国际货币基金组织2021年的报告明确肯定香港在全球的国际金融中心的地位。联合国贸易和发展会议2021年报告将香港年度吸纳直接外商投资名列全球第3位。香港的法治指标自2003年起一直维持在90分以上。香港国安法实施至今，香港的新股募集资金超过6500亿港元，这些都是国际社会对“一国两制”对香港投下的信任票。正如许多国际友人所言，“一国两制”蕴含着中国智慧、中国力量和中国贡献，不仅取得成功，也为国际社会解决类似问题提供了借鉴。女士们、先生们、朋友们，25年风雨兼程，香港依然昂首挺立，新的起点更续前行，香港逐梦美好明天。如今，中国共产党团结带领中国人民踏上了迈向第2个100年奋斗目标的新的征程。100年变局和世纪疫情交织叠加，世界之变、时代之变、历史之变正以前所未有的方式展开。香港既面临着严峻挑战，也迎来了难得的发展机遇。在这个承上启下的关键节点，紫荆文化集团举办这次论坛，很荣幸地邀请到来自美国、英国、瑞士、马来西亚等国家和香港特别行政区19位国际知名专家学者、著名企业家相互交流、相互启迪。希望各位嘉宾畅所欲言，为“一国两制”行稳致远建言献策，共同讲好新时代的香港故事，助力香港发挥独特优势，在实现中华民族伟大复兴的历史进程中发挥出新的更大作用。女士们、先生们、朋友们，长风破浪会有时，直挂云帆济沧海。习近平主席向全世界郑重宣示，中央全面准确贯彻“一国两制”方针的决心从没有动摇，更不会改变。 这是中央关心支持香港的最强音，也为香港发展提供了强劲的动力和坚定的信心。我们坚信，一国两制伟大实践必将在香港谱写新的华章，创造出新的辉煌。再过几天，我们就迎来香港回归祖国25周年的日子。让我们共同祝愿伟大的祖国繁荣昌盛，共同祝愿香港的明天更加美好，也祝愿本次论坛取得圆满成功。谢谢大家。
谢谢超峰董事长。下面我们有请香港特别行政区行政长官林郑月娥女士致辞，大家掌声欢迎。
Please welcome Mrs. Carrie Lam, Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, to deliver her speech.
Commissioner Liu, Mr. Lee, Mr. Mao, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It really gives me great pleasure to speak to you all at the Bauhinia Culture International Forum. As the 25th anniversary of the establishment of a Hong Kong Special Administrative Region draws near, this is an opportune occasion to celebrate the remarkable achievements of the one country, two systems principle over the past quarter century. It is also a good time to envision Hong Kong's promising future, leveraging this unique arrangement, particularly with what our city has gone through in the past several years. I would therefore wish to first of all thank the Bauhinia Culture Group for organizing this very meaningful event. Looking back to the 1st of July 1997, Hong Kong's return to the motherland, together with the establishment of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, was a monumental achievement. Everyone was anxious to see how this pioneering and unprecedented concept of one country, two systems was to unfold, and whether Hong Kong would continue to shine as an international city. In terms of maintaining stability and prosperity and executing a high degree of autonomy, the practice of one country, two systems in Hong Kong is indisputably a success story. Thanks to the strong support of the motherland and Hong Kong people's resilience and innovative spirit, Hong Kong has emerged as Asia's world city. Hong Kong remains one of the world's freest and most competitive economies, the world's #3 global financial center, the world's #3 destination for foreign direct investment, and is the world's largest offshore renminbi hub, busiest air cargo hub, the 7th largest stock market, the 4th largest international maritime center, and the 6th largest merchandise trade center. Over 9,000 overseas and mainland companies have set up their business operations in Hong Kong. One country, two systems, as a strong governance system, has stood the test of time and overcome multiple challenges. But that is not all smooth sailing. As President Xi Jinping reminded us in his keynote address made in Hong Kong 5 years ago, one country, two systems is a pioneering initiative that has no precedent to follow. Its application entails an evolving process, and we will encounter new developments and new issues as we move along. In the early days, we weathered the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the 2003 SARS outbreak, the 2008 global financial tsunami, the 2012 protests against national education, the 2014 Occupy movement, and the anti-China and destabilizing activities in the Legislative Council following the 2016 elections, leading right up to the violence and riots in 2019, undermining national security. I and my government were facing some unprecedented challenges which could derail one country, two systems and paralyze the government. It was only with the timely intervention by the central government that a number of concrete actions were taken at the constitutional level to save the day. Within a year, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress exercised its power conferred by the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and enacted the National Security Law. The new law effectively plugs the loopholes in Hong Kong's security regime and gives us the essential systems to uphold national security. This was followed by the National People's Congress decision to improve the electoral system of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, which provides a robust systemic safeguard for patriots administering Hong Kong. I'm pleased to oversee the smooth conclusion of the 3 major elections held successively under the improved electoral system. These 2 key measures have laid a solid foundation for the continuous and faithful implementation of one country, two systems. After some 25 years, Hong Kong is finally back to the right track and would now advance forward. Looking back to what this term of government has achieved, I would like to say that Hong Kong is entering a new era of stability, prosperity, and opportunity, echoing the slogan of our 25th anniversary celebrations. As I am about to pass the baton to my successor, let us take comfort that the future Hong Kong is politically more stable due to the true significant central government initiatives I just mentioned. And I'm sure some of the distinguished speakers will have more to say on this aspect. The future Hong Kong is economically more solid, with the central government's support in the 14th Five-Year Plan to develop not only an international financial, transportation, and trade center, but also meeting Hong Kong's aspirations to become an international innovation and technology center, an international aviation hub, and an East meets West cultural hub. The future of Hong Kong is culturally more diverse, with the West Kowloon Cultural District featuring 2 world-class museums, namely the M+ and the Hong Kong Palace Museum, a flourishing art scene, and being the world's #2 art trading hub. I'm sure my good friend Adrian Zhang will have more to say on Hong Kong's cultural prospects. The future Hong Kong is technologically more advanced as a result of my government's investment of some 150 billion Hong Kong dollars in the past 5 years on research and development, infrastructure, nurturing of talents, support of startups. I look forward to President Zhang Xiang of the Hong Kong University to tell you more about Hong Kong's future in research and development. And finally, the future Hong Kong is environmentally more sustainable with our commitment to Hong Kong attaining carbon neutrality by the year 2050. Unfortunately, I went through the guest list of speakers and do not realize an environmentalist in the group. So let me give you 2 figures. 1, Hong Kong is really emerging as a very strong green finance hub. In the year 2021, a total of $56.6 billion of green and sustainable loans and debt were issued in this city, accounting for 1/3 of the total of Asia. Secondly, as we are moving towards carbon neutrality, you may wish to know that 1 out of 2 new private vehicles registered in Hong Kong in the first quarter of this year was a green vehicle. It was an EV. So much to say about the progress on the environment. Now, all the above wonderful things will happen as long as Hong Kong continues to faithfully implement one country, two systems, leverage her unique strengths, maintain an international outlook, while at the same time connecting ever more closely and deeply with our motherland, particularly with the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, which is a dynamic economic powerhouse with a market of more than 60 million people and a combined GDP equivalent to the 9th largest economy in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, after 25 years of implementation, the Basic Law and the One Country, Two Systems principle have proven to be the cornerstone of the fundamental safeguards for Hong Kong's prosperity and long-term stability. President Xi Jinping once remarked, and I quote, 一国是根，根深才能叶茂；一国是本，本固才能枝荣。That means one country is like the roots of a tree. The roots must run deep and strong for a tree to grow tall and luxuriant. I agree wholeheartedly. I would also add, if I may, that two systems gives Hong Kong the chance to flourish on its own unique way, so that we may contribute more fully to the vibrant and lush growth of our country. As we celebrate the 25th anniversary of implementation of One Country, Two Systems in Hong Kong, we should be mindful of the past challenges we faced and stay true to the original aspiration of this principle. Let us not forget that in all these times, the central government has provided the strongest support for the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. This is a critical moment for Hong Kong to embrace a new era of stability, prosperity, and opportunity. I am confident that with the continued support from the central government and the concerted efforts of our community, Hong Kong will continue to overcome challenges and scale new heights and make contributions to our country, realizing the second centenary goal and the Chinese dream of national rejuvenation. I wish you all many fruitful exchanges and today's forum a great success. Thank you very much.
谢谢林郑月娥行政长官。下面有请香港特别行政区后任行政长官李家超先生致辞，大家掌声欢迎。
Now please invite Mr. John Lee, the Chief Executive Designate of the Hong Kong SAR, to make his speech.
Chief Executive Carrie Lam, Commissioner Liao Guangyuan, Chairman Mao Chaofeng, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm delighted to be speaking to such a distinguished audience today. Let me first express my sincere appreciation to the Bohemian Culture Group for organizing this very meaningful international symposium in celebrating Hong Kong for the 25th anniversary of both our return to the motherland and the implementation of One Country, Two Systems. The latter, of course, is the special and enlightened arrangement that has guided our progress since July the 1st, 1997. The One Country, Two Systems principle and the Basic Law that enshrines it have brought forward notable successes over this past quarter century. In its journey, like all other things, there have been also challenges. None more painful than the harm caused by the unprecedented riots and violence, together with foreign interference in June 2019, threatening national security and traumatizing Hong Kong for more than 1 year. That led to the enactment of the Hong Kong National Security Law in June 2020. The Hong Kong National Security Law and the improved electoral system that followed have returned confidence to Hong Kong society as a whole. Stability has since returned, and Hong Kong is now on the journey of proper governance to prosperity. When I visited Beijing to receive the Central People's Government's appointment to be the 6th-term Chief Executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, I had the honor to meet with President Xi. He said to me, and I quote, "Despite challenges over the past 25 years, the practice of one country, two systems in Hong Kong has become a resounding success. Indeed, the one country, two systems principle is guaranteed by our Constitution and the Basic Law. The Basic Law guarantees Hong Kong people's freedoms and rights and Hong Kong's long-term stability and prosperity. Looking to the future," President Xi added, "the Hong Kong has achieved a major transition from chaos to order and is now at a crucial stage of advancing to prosperity." Ladies and gentlemen, over the next few minutes, allow me to focus on how we will get there and how Hong Kong will most assuredly advance to prosperity. In broad terms, one key factor is the strong and special status that are given Hong Kong under the one country, two systems, together with the strong support of our nation. Let me begin with the Constitution, the basic laws, and our legal system and the rule of law, and the critical underpinnings of our one country, two systems foundation. Hong Kong is the only common law jurisdiction in China. Our commitment to the rule of law, to judicial independence, is unassailable. It is the key to the confidence in Hong Kong and our long-term prosperity and stability as an international financial and investment center. The World Bank's Worldwide Governance Indicators ranks Hong Kong second in Asia when it comes to the rule of law. Unfortunately, this compelling, reassuring reality is often lost in the self-interest political bad-mouthing in international politics and punditry. This is why the 6th-term Hong Kong SAR government will place considerably more emphasis on promoting our legal system and the judicial independence it guarantees, not just to the people of Hong Kong, but also to the world as a whole. Last year, Hong Kong was ranked the world's 3rd most preferred seat for arbitration by Queen Mary University of London's International Arbitration Survey. Last week, Vice Foreign Minister Xie Feng, speaking at a symposium in Shenzhen, urged Hong Kong to use its substantial legal experience and abundant talents to help promote the rule of law because of the escalation of rules-related disputes worldwide. As Vice Minister Xie suggested, Hong Kong can provide expert legal guidance in shaping international rules while safeguarding the legitimate security and development interests and rights of our nation. We will seize every opportunity the 14th National Five-Year Plan has so generously given to Hong Kong. not only in legal and dispute resolution services, but in boosting our status as an international center of finance, trade, and transportation. We will focus as well on the 4 emerging strengths the 5-year plan has called on us to develop. These are innovation and technology, aviation, and intellectual property protection, as well as enhancing our unique position as a center for international cultural and arts exchange. Then there is the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, which will expand our domestic market from a population of about 7.5 million to some 90 million, while generating opportunities for nearly every sector in our economy. In integrating with the Greater Bay Area, Hong Kong will be at the forefront of one of the world's most dynamic, most innovative cluster city developments. Hong Kong will also continue to strengthen its ties with the international world, enhancing its status as an international metropolis, as well as the gateway to the mainland. That means wide-ranging long-term prospects, economically, culturally, and creatively for the people of Hong Kong. As President Xi said on the occasion of the Hong Kong SAR 20th anniversary, it is important to put people first, help them overcome difficulties, especially address prominent economic and lively issues that people are concerned with, and truly increase their sense of contentment and happiness. This Parliament principle is the guidance for the 6th-term government, which will put priority on such deep-rooted issues such as housing, healthcare, youth development, and more. We will do so with dispatch, with determination, and with readiness to make changes. We will be judged, and I will be judged, not just on the amount of our efforts, but more importantly, on our ability to make positive differences for the good of the people. These are daunting challenges, but there are many, many strong, positive, and favorable elements for the continuing success of Hong Kong. These include the unwavering support of our nation, the one country, two systems principle, the resilience of Hong Kong, its talents and committed workforce, the responsive social networks, the city's strong competitiveness built over the many years of development as an international business and financial center, together with the strong governing team that I'm building. These challenges are, to me, the driving force and the motivation to make achievements for the good of society and for the benefits of the community. I shall make these demands to my governing team. They are to be result-oriented, with strong team spirit of collaboration and unity. They are to be ready to rise up to challenges, focus on efficiency and effectiveness, cut red tape and streamline procedures, and most importantly, to deliver results. Today's event, I'm sure, will deliver the result of a very good and useful exchange among participants. I wish the symposium a great success. Thank you.
谢谢李家超先生。 下面我们请国务院港澳事务办公室副主任黄柳泉先生通过视频致辞，大家掌声欢迎。
Next is a video speech of Huang Liuquan, Deputy Director of Hong Kong and Macau Affairs.
李家超后任行政长官，刘光源特派员，毛超峰董事长，各位嘉宾，各位朋友，大家上午好。在香港回归祖国25周年之际，紫荆文化集团以“一国两制的成功与展望”为主题，举办论坛，邀请国内外专家学者共同回顾“一国两制”的实践过程，展望站在新起点上的香港发展前景，非常有意义。我谨代表夏宝龙副主席和国务院港澳办，预祝论坛取得圆满成功。半个月前，习近平主席在会见李家超后任行政长官时指出，25年来，尽管经历了许多风雨挑战，但“一国两制”在香港的实践取得了举世公认的成功。习主席的讲话是对香港回归祖国以来所走过非凡历程的精辟总结，是对“一国两制”在香港实践情况的科学评价。我注意到，有些朋友对于香港经历的风雨挑战深为感慨，而对于“一国两制”实践取得的成功，却似乎存在疑虑。借此机会，我想和大家分享自己的一点体会，供大家参考。我认为，衡量一件事做得成功与否，关键是看有没有达到既定之目的，也就是有没有实现初心。习近平主席一再指出，中央政府对香港实行的各项方针政策，根本宗旨是维护国家主权、安全、发展利益，保持香港长期繁荣稳定。这就是“一国两制”的初心。事实证明，“一国两制”在香港取得的成功是实实在在、有目共睹的。从维护国家主权、安全、发展利益来看，按照“一国两制”方针，中国政府恢复对香港行使主权，成功迈出实现祖国完全统一的重要一步。香港政权交接之顺利，过渡之平稳，堪称典范，改变了世界历史上但凡收复失地都要大动干戈的定势，是中华民族为世界和平与发展做出的新贡献。回归祖国后的香港重新纳入国家治理体系，宪法和基本法共同构成特别行政区的宪制基础。中央对特别行政区的全面管制权和特别行政区的高度自治权有机结合，全新的特别行政区制度得到有效运行。从保持香港长期繁荣稳定来看，按照“一国两制”方针，香港原有的经济社会制度和生活方式不变，法律基本不变，香港居民享有的权利和自由前所未有。香港继续作为单独的关税地区，继续保持自由港地位，继续实行低税政策、自由贸易政策，自行发行货币，国际金融、航运、贸易中心地位持续巩固提升，经济保持平稳发展，社会事业全面进步。从回归之初到现在，香港的 GDP 从1.37万亿港元增长到2.87万亿港元，人均 GDP 从21.2万港元增长到 38.7万港元，港股市值从3.2万亿港元增长到38万亿港元，外汇储备从928亿美元增长到4650亿美元。香港在全球法治指数中的排名从60多位上升到第19位。香港的人均预期寿命更已连续多年稳居全球榜首。我听说，香港一家电视台正在制作一档庆祝香港回归祖国25周年的节目，其中将要展现香港这25年的25个世界第一。综合以上2个方面，我想大家都会认同，一国两制在香港毫无疑问取得了巨大成功。25年的丰富实践足以证明，一国两制行得通、办得到、得人心。它不仅是处理历史遗留的香港问题的最佳解决方案，也是香港回归后保持长期繁荣稳定的最佳制度安排。坚持一国两制，不仅是包括香港同胞在内的全国人民的共同意愿，而且符合外国投资者和世界各国的利益。习近平主席反复强调，中央全面准确贯彻一国两制方针的决心从没有动摇，更不会改变。事实上，一国两制作为中央政府的一项基本国策，自20世纪80年代提出以来，已郑重写入宪法，并通过基本法予以制度化、法律化，还写入了国家一系列的重要文件，包括国家发展规划。所有这些都充分彰显了中央政府坚定不移、全面准确贯彻落实一国两制的决心和信心。我想特别指出的是，过去2年多来，中央政府因应香港出现的复杂局面，制定实施香港国安法，完善香港选举制度，弥补了香港在维护国家安全、落实爱国者治港方面存在的漏洞，巩固了宪法和基本法确立的宪制秩序。这些举措不仅没有损害或改变一国两制，反而有利于维护、捍卫一国两制，有利于确保一国两制实践不变形、不走样，能够沿着正确的方向行得更稳，走得更远。我注意到，林郑月娥行政长官日前就特别的提到，香港经历了这几年的风风雨雨，全赖中央制定实施香港国安法和完善特区的选举制度这2大举措，让香港重回一国两制的正确轨道。在中央坚定支持以及林郑月娥行政长官和特别行政区政府的不懈努力下，香港已实现由乱到治的重大转折，正处在由治及兴的关键时期。同为香港开新篇，已经成为香港社会各界的共同期盼。习近平主席指出，中央对李家超先生充分肯定，也充分信任，相信新一届特别行政区政府施政一定会展现新气象，香港发展一定会谱写新篇章。我们完全可以期待，新一届特别行政区政府将带领香港社会各界，共同建设一个 充满活力的香港，一个人人都有幸福的香港，一个高度开放的香港，一个广泛团结的香港，一个社会安宁的香港。相信这也是很多国际友人乐见其成的。当前，香港的发展具备积极条件，拥有突出优势，面临大好机遇，更有中央政府的全力支持和祖国内地的强大依托，香港的发展前景必定是光明灿烂的。这里我想重提一个大家都知道的故事。在香港临近回归祖国的1995年，有家美国知名杂志社预言，香港已死。2007年，也就是香港回归10周年的时候，这家杂志又刊登了一篇题为“哎呦，香港根本死不了”的文章。开头第一句话就说：“我们错了。”这个故事对我们每个人都颇具启示。以往打赌香港失败的人从没有赢过，将来也不会赢。今天我就以此结束我的发言，谢谢大家。
谢谢黄柳泉先生。下面有请外交部驻香港特别行政区特派员公署特派员刘光源先生致辞，大家掌声欢迎。
Please welcome Mr. Liu Guangyuan, Commissioner of the Office of the Commissioner of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hong Kong SAR.
Honorable Chief Executive Carrie Lam, Honorable Chief Executive-elect John Lee, Chairman Mao Chao-feng, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends. In just half a month, we will commemorate the historical moment of the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to the motherland. Over the past 25 years, Hong Kong has traveled an extraordinary journey and made remarkable achievements. With a fresh look of great confidence, openness, inclusiveness, and vitality, Hong Kong has proven to the world that one country, two systems is feasible, workable, and popular. First, under one country, two systems, Hong Kong develops quality democracy. During British rule period, there was no democracy in Hong Kong, and local Chinese were long denied participation in Hong Kong's governance. Hong Kong ended that history in 1997. Under the Chinese Constitution and Basic Law, Hong Kong has gradually developed democracy in line with its reality. Hong Kong citizens have more channels for political participation, and their freedoms are guaranteed by law. Faced with regressive and dangerous moves of anti-China forces in and outside Hong Kong to lead Hong Kong's democracy to a dead end, the central government took decisive actions to adopt the national security law and improve Hong Kong's electoral system, and fully implement the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. These measures helped Hong Kong to get rid of the quagmire of making everything political, wake up from the maze of Western-style democracy, and embarked on a new journey of quality democracy and substantive democracy. Second, Under one country, two systems, Hong Kong enjoys a solid development foundation. Over the past 25 years, the progress of the motherland has injected a strong impetus to Hong Kong. When integrating into the overall national development, Hong Kong has given full play to the benefits of the two systems and become a super connector between the mainland and the wide world. Hong Kong maintains a solid position as a global financial, shipping, and trading center. It is the world's third largest financial hub, the sixth largest trading entity, and the fourth largest shipping registry, and the world's largest renminbi offshore center. It is also a key platform for Belt and Road cooperation. What's more, Hong Kong has long been recognized as the most free, open, competitive economy and ranks among the top in terms of business environment and rule of law. Last year, the number of overseas and mainland companies in Hong Kong rose to more than 9,000, a record high. The international business community remains optimistic about the prospect of Hong Kong, given the strong backing from the motherland. And the pearl of the Orient is shining ever more brightly. Third, under one country, two systems, Hong Kong enjoys huge benefits from openness and inclusiveness. As a global metropolis, Hong Kong's foreign exchanges have been more active, and its global influence is growing. Since 1997, the number of foreign consular missions in Hong Kong has increased from 88 to 119. Intergovernmental organizations that Hong Kong joined reached 97, and Hong Kong's overseas economic and trade offices grew to 14. Furthermore, Hong Kong has signed more than 600 bilateral agreements with foreign countries and has become a home to over 20 international legal agencies. A growing number of Hong Kong's young talents have opportunities to work in international organizations with the strong support of the central government. More than 270 Chinese embassies and consulates all over the world are providing around-the-clock consular services to Hong Kong compatriots. Hong Kong people feel more secure and more confident when they are abroad because they know that the motherland will always have them back. Distinguished guests, friends, Hong Kong has transformed from chaos to stability and is at a critical stage for greater prosperity and effective governance. With the strong support of the central government, as well as the joint efforts of Hong Kong SAR government and all sectors of Hong Kong society, Hong Kong will certainly become a bright pool with more thriving economy, more harmonious environment, and a higher quality democracy, better rule of law, and a happier life. Our confidence is from the irresistible historical trend of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Today's China is on a magnificent journey towards the greater renewal of the Chinese nation, and that is the greatest strength for Hong Kong's development. China is promoting high-level opening up and is releasing dividends to the world with its mega market, a stable and a complete set of industrial chain and more favorable business environment, which will inject huge energy into Hong Kong. The 14th Five-Year Plan, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the Greater Bay Area will also provide a broader space for Hong Kong's development. For business friends all over the world, choosing Hong Kong is choosing opportunities. Investing in Hong Kong is investing in the future. Our confidence is from the strong determination of the central government to fully and faithfully implement one country, two systems. The Communist Party of China is a founder, leader, follower, and a defender of one country, two systems. No one cherishes the original aspiration of one country, two systems more deeply than the Communist Party of China. When President Xi Jinping met with Chief Executive-elect John Lee days ago, he once again emphasized that the central government's resolve to fully and faithfully implement the principle of one country, two systems has never wavered and will remain unwavering. President Xi's words are of great significance for Hong Kong to move forward on the right track. The Communist Party of China and the Chinese government have the confidence, wisdom, and ability to run well affairs of both the motherland with a socialist system and Hong Kong with a capitalist system. Our confidence is from the unity of Hong Kong people. In today's Hong Kong, a consensus that Hong Kong is secure only when the country is secure is building up. Unity among citizens is growing. People all cherish the current stability and are seeking greater progress. The principle of patriots administering Hong Kong has been implemented, and the political pattern of broad and balanced participation by all sectors of Hong Kong society has been established, marking a new chapter of effective governance in Hong Kong. We welcome the international community and foreign friends in the city to work together for a better Hong Kong. The Commissioner's Office of the Chinese Foreign Ministry in Hong Kong SAR and the Hong Kong SAR government were established on the same day and have been growing together. Standing at the new starting point, our Commissioner's Office will continue to firmly safeguard national security, sovereignty, and development interests to create a sound external environment for Hong Kong's development. We will build more platforms for Hong Kong's external exchanges and cooperation by using diplomatic resources in the spirit of benefiting Hong Kong through diplomacy. We will act in the principle of putting people first and safeguard the security and lawful rights and interests of overseas Hong Kong compatriots. Going forward, we will work closely with the Hong Kong SAR to write a new splendid chapter in the practice of one country, two systems in Hong Kong. Thank you so much.
谢谢刘光源先生。让我们再次以热烈的掌声 对各位嘉宾的精彩支持表示诚挚的感谢。
也谢谢文宏武先生主持刚刚的环节。
Thank you very much, Mr. 文宏武。那么接下来我们要进入本次纪念的颁发纪念碑的环节，由本次国际论坛组委会为联合主办机构以及支持机构颁发纪念碑。
Next, the organizing committee would like to present commemorative plaques to co-organizers and supporting organizations.
首先，由紫荆文化集团董事长毛超峰先生代表组委会为联合主办机构香港大学、首席支持机构新世界发展颁发纪念牌。有请毛超峰董事长、张翔校长和郑志刚总裁登台。
有请3位。First, Mr. Mao Chaofeng, Chairman of Bohemian Culture Group, on behalf of the organizing committee, presents co-organizers, the University of Hong Kong, and the chief supporting organization, New World Development, with flag.
好，有请毛超峰董事长向香港大学校长张翔先生颁发纪念牌。下面有请毛超峰董事长向新世界发展总裁郑志刚先生颁发纪念牌。
麻烦3位再一起看向前方，我们合影留念。
祝贺2位，请我们3位一起合影留念。好，谢谢3位，请我们2位嘉宾先入席就座。请张翔校长留步，请张校长留步，请毛超峰董事长和郑志刚总裁入席就座。
Yes, President Zhang Xiang, please stay longer with us.
接下来由紫荆文化集团总经理文宏武先生、香港大学校长张翔先生分别为支持机构颁发纪念牌。
And now, Mr. Wen Hongwu, General Manager of Bohemian Culture Group, and Mr. Zhang Xiang, President of the University of Hong Kong, will present the supporting organizations with flags.
好，请文宏武总经理登台为招商局集团有限公司董事会秘书总经理助理楚宗生先生，香港霍英东集团行政总裁霍振环先生，瑞安集团主席罗康瑞先生，中国工商银行亚洲主席兼执行董事高敏女士颁发纪念牌，请各位嘉宾上台。
And now let's welcome General Manager Wen Hongwu to present plaques to Mr. Chu Zhongsheng, Assistant President of China Merchants Group Limited, Mr. Ian Fort Chan Wan, Chief Executive Officer of the Fo Ying Tong Group in Hong Kong, and Mr. Vincent Lo Hong Shoi, GBM and Chairman of Shoi On Group, Mrs. Gao Ming, Chairman and Executive Director of Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Asia.
好的，下面有请文宏宇总经理来进行这个颁发的环节。这几位嘉宾分别是招商局集团有限公司董事会秘书总经理助理楚宗生先生，香港霍英东集团行政总裁霍振环先生，瑞安集团主席罗康瑞先生，中国工商银行亚洲主席兼执行董事高敏女士。好，请嘉宾和文宏武总经理一起合影留念。好，让我们以热烈掌声向我们的嘉宾表示祝贺。
好，麻烦我们看向前方的摄影师，再次合影留念。好，谢谢各位，请张翔校长继续留步，其他嘉宾请移步到座位上休息，谢谢。
谢谢，请张翔校长留步。下面有请张翔校长为香港各界庆典委员会庄子祥先生以及香港友好协进会总干事鲁夫先生、香港中资企业协会总裁张夏令先生颁发纪念牌。
Now, President Zhang Xiang, please present plaques to Dr. Chong Zi-Chan, the chairman of Hong Kong Celebration Association, and Mr. Lu Fu, CEO of Friends of Hong Kong Association Limited, and Mr. Zhang Xialing, president of the Hong Kong Chinese Enterprises Association.
“好，在颁发的环节中，也请我们的记者的朋友为我们的嘉宾和张善校长一起合影留念。让我们以热烈掌声向我们3位获奖嘉宾再次表示祝贺。
谢谢各位对香港回归25周年紫荆文化国际论坛的支持。
感谢文宏武总经理张翔校长和各位支持者的大力支持，谢谢你们。好，下面有请各位领导和嘉宾入席就座。论坛开幕式环节到此结束，让我们再次感谢行政长官林郑月娥女士、后任行政长官李家超先生等主礼嘉宾拨冗出席，并且欢送另有公务安排的主礼嘉宾。
Let's once again express our warmest thanks to all the officiating guests to come to our ceremony.
好的，下面我们进入今天的主旨演讲环节。在这个环节中，有来自美国、英国各国以及香港的知名专家学者、行业精英，将从不同的角度和视角来分享他们对“一国两制”的理解和认知。
And now we are having the keynote speech session. In this session, well-known experts, scholars, and industry elites from the United States, the United Kingdom, and other countries, as well as Hong Kong, will share their understanding and insight of one country, two systems from different perspectives. 好的，下面呢，我们先有请全国人大常委会香港特别行政区基本法委员会副主任谭慧珠女士发言。First of all, we're pleased to have Mrs. Maria Tam Wai Chu, Deputy Director of the Committee for the Basic Law of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, to deliver her speech.
欢迎。
Professor Chiang, the Chairman, Mr. Marsafong, ladies and gentlemen, my topic of speech today is Hong Kong's national security law escorts one country, two systems. This year marks the 25th anniversary of Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland. We can proudly say that the implementation of one country, two systems in Hong Kong has not only been able to withstand the vicissitudes of global politics and economy, but also with the support of the central government, our economic development has continued to thrive. Its status as an international trade, financial, and shipping center has been continuously entrenched. Hong Kong residents enjoy more democratic rights and freedom than any other time in history, and the principle Patriots administering Hong Kong has been implemented smoothly. Freedom, economy, rule of law, judicial independence, and integrity among the highest in the world. During the fifth wave of COVID-19 pandemic in Hong Kong, the central government and various regions throughout the mainland provided strong support to Hong Kong in combating the pandemic and supplying daily necessities through multiple channels, with a concerted effort of Hong Kong and the support from the mainland, creating more favorable conditions for resumption of normal traveler clearance between Hong Kong and the mainland. The next topic I want to talk about is Hong Kong's national security law is a significant milestone in the implementation of one country, two systems. One country, two systems is unprecedented in history, and we have to expect challenges. Since Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland, the delay in fulfilling the constitutional responsibility under Article 23 of the Hong Kong Basic Law to enact laws to protect national security has given the opportunity to anti-China forces and foreign interference in Hong Kong, triggering the riots in 2019 and 2020, which has impacted the governance of Hong Kong, seriously challenged the bottom line of the principle of one country, two systems, and endanger national sovereignty, security, and development interests. With a one country principle, the concept of national security is unified. The National Security Law of the People's Republic of China stipulates national security refers to the state in which state power, sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, people's well-being, sustainable economic and social development, and other major national interests are relatively free from danger, and internal and external threats, as well as the ability to ensure a continuous state of security. As a local administrative region, we must fulfill our responsibility to safeguard national security. In order to maintain the stability and prosperity of Hong Kong, to safeguard the life and property of Hong Kong residents, the National People's Congress on the 28th of May 2020 decided that the Hong Kong National Security Law be enacted by the Standing Committee of the NPC. We call this the 528 decision, prohibiting secession and subversion of state power, terrorist activities, and enemy and crimes, such as colluding with foreign forces and endangering national security and endangering national security. This is to make sure the implementation of one country, two systems is steadfast and successful. For 2 years since the implementation of the NSL, anti-China foreign countries continues its double standard smearing against us. Hong Kong implemented the NSL in June 2020. In July of that year, US President Donald Trump announced sanctions on a number of officials in Hong Kong and Chinese central government, alleging that the NSL violates the Joint Declaration and deprives Hong Kong residents of their human rights and freedoms. In fact, a lot of evidence at that time was pointing to anti-China elements in Hong Kong colluding with foreign forces and incited riots here. The move by the President of the United States can be seen as a confirmation of this assertion. The actual fact is, Article 4 of the NSL protects the rights and freedom of Hong Kong residents under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights as they applied in Hong Kong before reunification. Article 5 guarantees the rights of suspects in criminal cases, and the NSL has no retrospective effect. So Mr. Trump's allegations were groundless. United States passed the U.S. Patriots Act after the 9/11 incident. In the name of preventing terrorism, the law greatly expanded the power of the police department, the national intelligence agencies, and the Department of Treasury, and strengthened the power to detain foreign nationals suspected of being associated with terrorism. The debate to close the notorious Guantanamo Bay detention camp started in 2009. It's still going on after 14 years, and the camp is still in operation. In the United Kingdom, recently they proposed a new national security bill which specifically mentioned foreign interference in the political system. Dissemination of false news, cyber operations, and other national security risks originating from foreign countries. It also targeted at foreign interference, malign activities carried out for a foreign power with the intent to achieve the effect of manipulating the political process or impairing national security or interests. The UK government says it must legislate to get ahead of this threat. It seems that Hong Kong has struck a better balance between the protection of national security and individual freedoms. The fourth topic I want to talk about is how the Hong Kong courts value the rights and freedom of residents and prudently determine the power of the provision of the NSL. In Jimmy Lai's case, because of the serious nature of an offense under the NSL, it is provided under Article 42(2) that no bail should be granted to a criminal suspect or defendant unless the judge has sufficient grounds for believing that the criminal suspect or defendant will not continue to commit acts endangering national security. But it does not follow, especially in the light of the NSL Articles number 4, 5, 41, and 42, that consideration of possible bail conditions should be excluded while deciding the sufficient grounds question. This is a separate matter for assessment by the magistrate or judge. In Tam Tak Chi's case, the court clarified some conceptual terms such as ill will, contempt, hatred, etc. The court also ruled that the crimes complies with the provision of the Basic Law and the Hong Kong Bill of Rights. On the protection of human rights, and balance should be struck between safeguarding national security and safeguarding freedom of speech, assembly, and procession. Tam Tak Chi has filed an appeal to clarify the concept of sedition. The appeal judgment will enrich the connotation of the law on safeguarding national security. Fifth point, Hong Kong's status as a financial and business center remained competitive after the enactment of the NSL. The Honorable Carrie Lam and Mr. Lau and Commissioner Liu has already cited cases or statistics in which this is already proved. I will just add two on the commercial side, and this is as from yesterday. Hong Kong's ranking as the most competitive economy has moved from the 7th place to the 5th place, and this is by the Lausanne Institute of Switzerland. Now I turn to the issue of law and order and rule of law. Hong Kong ranked 5th in the Pacific region and 19th globally for its overall rule of law performance. For the absence of corruption, 3rd in East Asia and Pacific region, and 9th globally under the factor of absence of corruption. This is from the World Justice Project. And in 2021, the worldwide governance indicator shows that for rule of law, Hong Kong ranked 18th amongst 209 countries and territories. Recently, the Financial Secretary, the Honorable Paul Chang, has just announced that the total bank deposit in Hong Kong has reached a total of 15.3 billion Hong Kong dollars, an increase of 10% since the NSL. So Hong Kong is alive and well. Sixthly, looking into the prospects. Hong Kong to enact national security law under Article 23 of the Basic Law. The 528 decision of the National People's Congress clearly stated that safeguarding national sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity is the constitutional responsibility of the Hong Kong SAR. we are proceeding to enact laws on prohibition of treason, sedition, theft, and state secrets, etc., and safeguard the success of one country, two systems. The prosperity and stability of Hong Kong depends on the unique functions brought about by its geographical advantages. It closely serves the reform and opening up and modernization of mainland China and makes full use of its advantage of the rule of law and social stability to provide a favorable and safe investment environment for investors all over the world. The NSL targets the insurgence of rampant terrorist activities that undermine social order and the basis of the rule of law. It also targets those who attempt to turn Hong Kong into a base for subverting the state and foreign forces that interferes in Hong Kong's affairs. The NSL has brought back law and order, safety to the life and property of our residents, the freedoms and rights of vast majority of Hong Kong residents are completely unaffected. In hearing cases involving the NSL, the court gives due consideration to protecting human rights and freedom under the common law. Development-wise, we shall make full use of the opportunities provided by the National 14th Five-Year Plan, the construction of the GBA, the Belt and Road Initiative, and RCP, etc., and show our strength as the super connector. With the sixth-term chief executive leading, we shall write a new chapter on the one country, two systems success story. Thank you very much.
非常感谢谭慧珠女士。Thank you very much, Mrs. Maria Tan Wei-Chu. 下面有请英国剑桥大学前高级研究员马丁·雅克先生做视频发言。Next, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Martin Jakes, former senior researcher of the University of Cambridge in the United Kingdom, to give us his video speech. Please look at the screen.
It's my privilege to be invited to speak at the Bauhinia International Forum on One Country, Two Systems, Achievements and Prospects. I wish the International Forum every success. The handover of Hong Kong in 1997 to China was a hugely significant event. It reversed the loss of Hong Kong following the First Opium War, one of the most disgraceful episodes in British colonial history. And it was to mark also the beginning of the century of humiliation. The handover, in contrast, was a landmark moment in China's quest to reunify the country and recover its lost territories. China's approach was, in global terms, highly innovative. The idea of one country, two systems was fundamentally alien to the Western nation-state tradition. In contrast, it was deeply rooted in Chinese thinking, based on the notion of China as primarily a civilization state rather than a nation state. While the Western tradition assumes one country, one system, the Chinese tradition draws on the idea of one country, many systems. Innovative, appropriate, and timely, as the idea of one country, two systems undoubtedly was, China faced a very complex problem in Hong Kong. What should be the precise balance between one country on the one hand and two systems on the other? In this context, it faced two challenges, one external and the other internal. The attitude of the West and domestic Hong Kong opinion, respectively. The West consistently downplayed one country, that is Chinese sovereignty, and placed overwhelming emphasis on two systems. Hong Kong attitudes, for their part, were to a degree supportive, but also skeptical. After the handover, Hong Kong chose to move slowly, emphasizing continuity rather than rupture, anxious to reassure both Western opinion and local Hong Kong doubts. By 2014, however, it was clear that there was growing dissatisfaction in Hong Kong, culminating in the riots of 2019. If the central priority in Hong Kong in 2020-21 was to restore order and stability, the main task now confronting the government is winning the support of the Hong Kong people. The primary reason for the disillusionment was socio-economic. Rocketing property prices, a chronic shortage of homes, and an old colonial-style oligopolistic economy which generated huge inequality and little innovation. Between 1997 and 2019, the government had failed to tackle these fundamental problems. No serious break was made with the legacy of the colonial era. On the contrary, in key respects, little changed. The status quo largely prevailed. This was further exacerbated by the legacy of Hong Kong's colonial history. After 156 years of British colonialism, Hong Kongers habitually looked west, not north. Many liked the idea of being Western at a time when the West still enjoyed considerable status and prestige. Hong Kongers had a split identity, part Chinese, part Western. That is why many had mixed feelings about the handover, to which they responded with, shall we say, passive acceptance. There is no simple solution to the latter. History is history. 156 years is a very long time. Any meaningful solution to this problem will require the passage of time, the creation of a newly successful Hong Kong that people can identify with and take ownership of, combined with patient, persuasive statecraft on the part of the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government. The socio-economic problem, though, is a different matter. This demands urgent attention and a major shift in strategy and thinking by the Hong Kong authorities. One country, two systems Mark II, as I would describe it, should comprise three key features. First, a new unity based on an unambiguous acceptance of Chinese sovereignty. This is not new. It was fundamental to one country, two systems Mark I, but it was constantly challenged and contested both within Hong Kong and by Western politicians and media. There can be no further ambiguity. Second, Hong Kong's future depends on a much closer relationship with China in a whole host of different ways, including, most importantly of all, the Greater Bay Area. The Northern Metropolis project near the border with Shenzhen is a most welcome development in this context. The center of gravity of Hong Kong needs to shift northwards. Third, an ambitious and radical program of socio-economic reform that can transform Hong Kong in a manner similar to China's own reform program. Of course, Hong Kong is in crucial respects very different from China, and any program must reflect this. The central thrust for Hong Kong must be what I would describe as the modernization and decolonization of Hong Kong in terms of its economic structure and its administrative system. The control exercised by a handful of tycoons over the supply of land must be ended. A huge program of residential construction is a prerequisite. Together, these offer the prospect of cheaper housing and a plentiful supply of homes, the lack of which is perhaps the biggest grievance of ordinary Hong Kongers. If China can abolish extreme poverty, Hong Kong can and should be expected to do no less. The anger and alienation revealed by the riots came overwhelmingly from the young, who felt Hong Kong offered them little in the way of hope in terms of jobs, education, and housing. Winning the young is the most important task facing the government. It is encouraging that John Lee, the new chief executive, has embraced many of the above points in his initial statements. The problem with one country, two systems Mark I was its failure to address the legacy of British colonialism and its acquiescence in a status quo that was clearly failing the majority of the people. Mark II must be very different. A radical program of reform in housing, land supply, education and training, combined with an assault on poverty and inequality, can together stimulate a new sense of optimism in Hong Kong and begin the process of winning the hearts and minds of the people. Thank you for listening.
谢谢马丁雅克先生。下面有请香港大学校长张翔先生发言。Now let's welcome Mr. Zhang Xiang, President of the University of Hong Kong, to deliver a speech. 有请。
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I begin to thank you for inviting me here to speak as we honor the 25 years of Hong Kong's return to China and recognize 25 years of unity and progress. This moment is a special milestone in our history and one we will not forget. As a global city, Hong Kong has benefited from one country, two systems, a unique policy that embeds the quality of vision, purpose, and intent. It leverages Hong Kong's unique advantages and has allowed millions of people to fulfill their potential. Advancing the human condition is a rare opportunity anywhere in the world. But thanks for China, Hong Kong is a real exception to this rule. Indeed, looking back on the success of past quarter century, one country, two systems has positioned us in a right place at the right time and has unfolded a future of great and far-reaching opportunities. We are very proud that Hong Kong is part of China. When I speak of the future, I think of young people everywhere in this world who are struggling to adjust to rapid changing world where war, terrorism, poverty, climate change, and diseases outbreaks have sadly become the norm and not the exception. But I also see these grand challenges through the lens of higher education. From where I sit as the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Hong Kong. And more simply, as someone who believes the power of knowledge and learning. To me, education is the key that unlocks the possibilities in each and every human being. It reshapes lives, it reinvents communities. It progresses human civilization. Education, in particular, higher education, transforms families in single generation, and parents, grandparents leapfrog the traditional timeline of progress when young people are nurtured to success. Thus, we have a real chance to positively impact the entire community. This has a direct link to the opportunity created by one country, two systems. In the past 25 years, academic interactions between Hong Kong and the mainland have grown significantly and flourished. This is especially important to our context in Hong Kong because meaningful change occurs when we meet, share, and collaborate. Hong Kong U, among others, is helping to drive this dynamic and fruitful journey. We were one of the first to offer exchange programs with mainland, giving our students a chance to thrive and develop through experiential learning with fellow Chinese, bringing them up to close to the people and places that are backbone of this important country. China's reform and transformation over the last 40 years is something all of us can be very proud of. China is not only the world's second largest economy, but also biggest contributor to the United Nations peacekeeping forces, which helps countries to navigate the complex path from conflict to peace. China is also a champion of Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, which unites the world with a common global agenda. The possibilities are endless. With a population of 1.4 billion people, we Chinese people represent the largest portion of global community. I want our young people in Hong Kong to know they are part of this great nation, and that together we can achieve anything we set out to achieve. In our exchange program, students travel to mega cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, but they also venture into towns and villages in remote and rural areas, reaching beyond the skills they gain from Hong Kong U campus and immersing themselves in unfamiliar culture and environments. This is how they learn to participate and contribute to the world around them, including China. Indeed, academic success is emptier if we don't encourage them towards a life of public service for social good. Over years, our students have taught classes in Gansu province and helped build new schools in Guangxi. And although I wasn't at Hong Kong U at that time, I was touched to hear that they also care for the victims of Sichuan earthquake in 2008. Clearly, these are life-changing experiences that go beyond what the exchange program normally offers. But we found that when our students teach, build, and care, they contribute to the development of China, while gaining important insight into the global challenges shaping the future. Be it poverty, hunger, or access to higher education, people around the world are struggling to survive, and we, as the leaders of higher education, have a moral duty to encourage the academic community to use our skills and compassion to solve the problems we witness around us. Universities in Hong Kong, not only our own, are bringing young people together in the name of humanity in the cause for a better and safer world. And I pledge to continue to encourage our students in that direction. Today, humanity faces a fight for survival, and what happens next depend on how we act for the well-being of our country and also the planet. Hong Kong U is driving that movement with the ambition of improving human lives. For example, Chief Executive Carrie Lam just mentioned the environment and climate. The climate change is a threatening to our Mother Earth and every human being in this planet. We must unite to find a global solution. Hong Kong U recently established a new institute focusing on climate change and carbon neutrality. We will collaborate with international partners in this important battle to develop technologies to reduce carbon dioxide emission and recapturing those emissions, and policies that enable sustainable living. But more importantly, how can we effectively help our country to inspire next generation of climate experts and leaders? We must impact the world in deep and transformative way. In academia, we sometimes lose our impact when we revert to old habits and think in silo. The Sustainable Development Goals, which I mentioned earlier, is one model for global collaboration. We should focus on the outcomes we want to achieve and respond to the higher calling that humankind requires for each of us. The world today faces more threats than any time since end of World War II. This is a time of interconnected crisis that is testing our strength and resolve collectively. In this pandemic, the entire world was plunged into an era of fear, loss, and suffering. Many doctors, nurses, and other health workers in Hong Kong has worked tirelessly together with the staff sent from mainland. They have all together saved many lives in Hong Kong. We thank everyone for risking themselves in order to protect our citizens. Universities, including our own, have responded in a unique way. In the first few weeks of the COVID-19, Hong Kong U scientists first discovered human transmissions among humans. That gives the world a head start on unknown diseases at that time, a very precious time window. Microsoft Academic ranked Hong Kong U #1 internationally for COVID-19 research. Again, we're actually aware the university campus are not isolated place for learning and research, but also the center of the community we serve. Today, we have a critical opportunity to co-sign the biggest challenge to history. If our crises are interconnected, our effort must be also. I'm excited to share that new initiatives at Hong Kong U will reinvent the way we look at the global issues across the board, gathering leaders and expertise in aging, smart city, sustainable living, and more. Throughout history, science and innovation have achieved breakthroughs once through impossible, and China's latest mission to the Tiangong space station is a proof of that. Higher education, as you all know, has a special role to play in advancing human condition. Finally, this brings me onto Hong Kong. Hong Kong has played a historical role as a bridge between the East and the West. One country, two systems offer Hong Kong institutional advantages, with innovation at the front of the social and economic development. We are a regime blessed with strategic location, first-class sea, land, and air transport, and diverse lifestyle that has evolved with a heritage of global exchange and reputation for openness. At the heart of this city is a harbor that is outward-looking, and we have become a place where people from many countries in the world have called Hong Kong home. On a personal note, this is why I came to Hong Kong 4 years ago and why I choose to make my life here. But more importantly, Hong Kong can look briefly into the future because of its role as linked to 1.4 billion people on mainland. 25 years after Hong Kong's return to China, we know that one country, two systems has enabled us to reach much higher potential. Allow me to close with this appeal. When we unify for social good, we can achieve anything, not only for ourselves, but especially in a world of great leads. It shouldn't matter where the world we were born or what circumstances we happen to be born into. If we have a dream and purpose, we have a real chance of improving the lives of the generations to come, here in Hong Kong and globally. That, to me, captures the spirit of solidarity and globalization, even though it is hard to talk about this term at this difficult time in the conflict of geopolitics. But we have to look forward and opportunities that higher education can offer. No one country can solve the ills of the global problems, but innovation and kindness will help us secure a bright future without limit. And as a part of China, Hong Kong has much to look forward to. Hong Kong is a global city that embraces the depth and richness of one country, two systems. We must maintain our openness and global outlook. Thank you very much.
非常感谢张翔校长的发言。Thank you very much, President 张翔。下面有请首席支持机构新世界发展行政总裁郑志刚先生做发言。Next, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Adrian Chan Chi-Kong, Chief Executive Officer of New World Development, to give us a speech.
尊敬的林郑月娥行政长官、李家超后任行政长官、毛超凤董事长、各位嘉宾，很荣幸能参加今天的论坛，跟大家一同庆祝香港回归祖国25周年，并探讨“一国两制”在香港的实践经验。“一国两制”是史无前例的制度的创新，没有任何国际先例可以参照。不过，经过25年的探索，香港保持了国际金融、贸易、航运中心的地位，维持了多项的竞争的优势，用现实说明了“一国两制”的生命力。今天，我希望借此机会，从上届的角度回顾过去25年香港在“一国两制”下取得的成就，以及未来该如何求变，创建新优势。寻找新地位。今年是2022年，刚好40年前中英谈判正式开始。那时候，国际社会对中国的前景感觉不确定，对香港未来也感到悲观。市民移民、企业撤资是常见的事。但作为上届一分子，新世界发展从来没有想过离开。我们很清楚，只要国家坚持改革开放，就必定会确保香港的繁荣稳定，上届就能得到长足的发展。所以我们集团当时反而坚定了信心，进一步深耕香港。旁边的香港会议展览中心就是一个好的例子。当时港英政府希望新建会展中心，但由于香港前途未明，企业都不敢接下来这个那么大的项目。只有我祖父郑裕彤先生答应承建，结果我们克服了各种困难，在回归前完工，让回归典礼能够在会议展览中心顺利的举行。至今，会议中心依然是香港最重要的地标之一。而历史其后也告诉我们，我们对香港前途的乐观是十分明智的。中英联合声明签署后，香港平稳过渡，顺利回归， 回归后，基本法也保障了香港资本主义制度和原有生活方式的不变，维护了香港各项的自由、权利、营商优势。到今天，低廉的税制、灵活的自由港体制、公正的普通法制度以及廉洁的政府依然行之有效，使香港持续成为中外企业的理想的营商地。2020年，香港国安法开始实施，国际社会曾忧虑香港营商优势不复存在，但现实证明，香港稳健如故。比如，根据世界银行2021年世界管理指标，香港在法治领域排名亚洲第2。同时间，流入香港的资金在最近2年也不跌反增。2020年6月，香港国安法实施前，香港银行体系结余为1300亿元。到了今年5月，香港的银行体系结余已超过3000亿，较2年前多出2倍。这些数字正是企业用脚投票的明证。由此可见，25年来，尽管香港经历过不小的风浪，但在一国两制和基本法的护航下，香港的营商优势还在，并一直贡献国家的发展大局和改革开放的事业。可是，随着时代的发展，如果我们希望继续成为国家发展的受益者和贡献者的话，但强调不变并不足够。在新的发展趋势下，香港需要积极的求变，发展新的优势，增添新的定位。在这一点，国家已经在“十四五”规划中清楚地指明，“十四五”规划赋予了香港8大中心地位，希望香港不但能巩固提升4大传统中心的竞争优势，还能进一步发展4大新兴中心。当中，中央更首次明确支持香港发展成为中外文化艺术交流中心，可见中央对香港在文化领域能够发挥的作用的期待。文化艺术不是什么虚无缥缈、高高在上的东西。我认为文化艺术就是生活，不但跟商业社会没有冲突，还能相互滋养，并发创意。10多年前，我创立了艺文上社的新模式，将艺术文化跟商业融合，并让商业成为普及和传统文化艺术的加速器，让大众得到了熏陶，让社会充分受益。这种模式被广泛称之为文化零售模式，很快得到了年轻人的青睐，包括大量的90后00后。我深刻感受到，香港新一代的年轻人不只是在追求物质体验，也重视人文和精神层面上的体验。他们喜爱艺术文化，也爱追求创新，也重视传统文化和保育和传承。可以说，文化艺术是与千禧一代沟通的有效的媒介。更重要的是，我们的年轻人将成为香港建设中外文化艺术交流中心的主力。我们需要鼓励年轻人在创新中传承，将中国文化，尤其是岭南文化，薪火相传下去。因此，我成立了 K11艺术基金会，推动中国当代的艺术的发展。其后又成立了 K11公益文化基金会，希望构建了一个可持续的方式，保护中国传统工艺，同时扶持新一代的工匠，鼓励香港青年投身中国艺术文化的事业。过几天， 香港故宫文化博物馆将会隆重开幕。我相信香港故宫将成为中小学生和青年人接触了解中国艺术文化的一个平台，通过举办各种展览和活动，增强与中小学生的互动，培养他们的人文素养、国家情怀。不仅如此，香港故宫更可以利用其国际的网络，广邀各界名家，吸引全球观众，在此交流中国历史、文化艺术，将生动的中国故事带出去。在今年11月，我们将与紫荆文化集团、故宫文化博物馆等机构合作，举办艺文香港论坛，请来中外专家分享文化保育和艺术的创作心得，希望能从而增强香港的文化的软实力，并说好中国故事，丰富香港作为中外文化艺术交流中心的内涵。期待届时看到大家。未来我会继续跟社会各界携手，为香港和国家创建更多的文化绿洲，推动新旧文化的交汇，中外文明的互鉴，与文化人以意通心，这是香港下一个25年能做的事。谢谢大家。
谢谢郑志刚先生，请就座，谢谢。下面有请香港资深大律师、香港特区政府前刑事检控专员江乐士先生发言。And now we're pleased to have Mr. Ian Granville Cross, Senior Counsel of Hong Kong and former Director of Public Prosecutions of Hong Kong SAR Government, to deliver his speech. Please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to have been invited to address you today. And as 25 years have now elapsed since Hong Kong's reunification with the motherland in 1997, this is obviously an opportune time to take stock of things and to consider the shape of things to come. I propose, therefore, to review how 3 criminal justice institutions, comprising the judiciary, the prosecutions division of the Department of Justice, and the police force, have fared since 1997, and to suggest how their operations can be enhanced. Now, since 1997, the judiciary in Hong Kong has grown enormously in stature, and this has been acknowledged globally. It provides a highly professional service, not only to the public, but also to the business world. It does this from a secure constitutional base, with the basic law providing, quote, that the courts shall exercise judicial power independently, free from any interference. A guarantee that did not exist in the colonial era when judicial independence was based purely on convention. Over the past 25 years, the judiciary has ensured that the trials of criminal suspects are fair and that they satisfy the legal standards stipulated by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. It has provided a level playing field for litigants, and disputes of all types are justly resolved. With the creation of the Court of Final Appeal in 1997, Hong Kong has acquired the power of final adjudication, and through the combined efforts of local permanent judges and non-permanent judges from other common law jurisdictions, justice of the highest order has been dispensed. Although some people imagined there would be difficulties in assimilating the national security law into our common law system after its enactment in 2020, the court has provided impeccable guidance, and people now know exactly where they stand. Indeed, it is no exaggeration to say that the court has developed a truly remarkable body of case law, and its judgments in all areas are regularly cited in other jurisdictions, invariably with approval. But this, however, is not to say that the judiciary has had an easy time of things, because it certainly has not. When those involved in the social disorder of 2019 to 20 set about trying to wreck Hong Kong and undermine the one country, two systems governing policy, they realized they faced a major obstacle in the judiciary, and they were quite correct in that. The judges held them to account in various ways, including by punishing lawbreakers, issuing injunctions to combat the doxing of public officers and incitements to violence on Facebook, and by freezing criminal assets. And precisely because the judges did so much to uphold the rule of law, they themselves then became the targets, and efforts were made by both local activists and foreign forces to interfere with their work. In an attempt to intimidate the judges, the protest movement's armed wing launched arson attacks on the Court of Final Appeal, the High Court, and the Sha Tin Magistrates Court, but to no avail. Once they realized that their attacks were not having the desired effect, their strategy switched to threatening particular judges. Although this started in 2019, when judges were demonized on social media and condemned in graffiti, the intimidation escalated in 2021, when many of the culprits finally faced justice. The threats to the judiciary took various forms, including death threats, bomb threats, and threats of injury, sometimes also directed at family members, with corrosive and other substances being sent to the courts. However, the judiciary refused to buckle, and despite the dangers, the judges have upheld the rule of law and remain true to their judicial oath, which requires them, quote, to safeguard the law and advance justice without fear or favor, deceit, or self-interest. Now, although the protest movement's domestic plan to intimidate the judiciary was from within, its foreign supporters mounted a separate campaign to undermine its effectiveness. Starting in 2019, long before anybody had heard of the national security law for Hong Kong, anti-China elements in the United Kingdom's Parliament were calling for British judges to be withdrawn from the Court of Final Appeal, as they imagined this would weaken its capacity to uphold the rule of law. Once the national security law was enacted, those calls increased in volume, and non-permanent judges in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom came under pressure to withdraw from the court. However, with only one or two exceptions, they stood firm, as they knew the court's qualities from first-hand experience, and they saw through the fallacies that were being disseminated. They appreciated not only the court's independence, but also its ability to provide the people of Hong Kong with a world-class legal system. It is certainly true that there have been occasional departures from the Court of Final Appeal's overseas judges, with two serving judges from the UK walking away from their responsibilities as recently as March the 30th, but this was a sideshow. The real story is not that several overseas judges left Hong Kong in the lurch, but that the vast majority of them made it absolutely clear that they are committed to Hong Kong and its people, and that they are determined to continue to dispense justice here. As things stand, there are 10 overseas judges available to sit when required as the fifth member of the Court of Final Appeal, along with the Chief Justice and the 3 permanent judges, and this should be more than enough. If, however, more overseas judges are required, there should be no difficulty in recruiting them. Apart from the traditional jurisdictions of Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, there is no reason why judges from elsewhere should not be considered, from places like India, Jamaica, or Singapore. Although some people suggest that the time is fast approaching when, as in most places, the Court of Final Appeal should be composed entirely of local judges, given that there is now so much homegrown talent available, I believe it remains a good arrangement for an international city. Indeed, the Court's own judges have sometimes acknowledged their indebtedness to their overseas colleagues, pointing out how beneficial it can be when difficult issues of law are being considered to have access to their experience and insights. And remember this, the 10 overseas judges are not just any old judges, but jurists of the highest possible international standing. They include 2 former presidents of the United Kingdom Supreme Court, 2 former Chief Justices of Australia, and the former Chief Justice of Canada, and Hong Kong is lucky to have them. Brains apart, their presence also serves to underscore the independence of the judiciary, which is important not only for the public, but also for the wider business community, including entrepreneurs, financiers, and investors. Now, although the judiciary has been greatly tested since 1997, it has overcome the various challenges with flying colours. And this has also been true of the city's prosecutions division and its police force. Under the Basic Law, prosecutors for the first time enjoy a constitutionally guaranteed independence, and the Basic Law stipulates that the Department of Justice, quote, shall control criminal prosecutions free from any interference. And this has been profoundly reassuring for prosecutors whose decisions are often controversial and easily attract criticism. And when they do find themselves pressurized, prosecutors can always point to their basic law protections. But this, of course, does not mean that prosecutors can act irrationally or that they do not need to explain themselves, and they can always be held to account. Since 1997, prosecutors, recognizing the importance of public support, have gone to great lengths to promote transparency, and a series of prosecution guidelines has been published and made available to the community. They not only explain prosecution policy and practice, but also indicate the way in which prosecutors consider that victims of crime and witnesses should be treated, and how cases of domestic violence should be handled. These levels of transparency were unimaginable before 1997, and they indicate the extent to which prosecutors now recognize the need to dispel misconceptions about their work and to promote a greater understanding of how they operate. Now, during the social unrest, the city's prosecutors found themselves under great strain, and saboteurs reportedly sought to influence their operations from within, although this was nipped in the bud. Apart from the huge pressure of work, which sometimes led to serious delays in the processing of cases, their decisions often attracted criticism, with allegations of political bias being not uncommon. The protest movement did all it could to demonize prosecutorial decisions and tried to give outsiders the impression that they were not free agents, but Beijing puppets. This, of course, was fallacious, as the central authorities have always scrupulously observed the provisions of the basic law, including prosecutorial independence. But dirt, unfortunately, sometimes sticks. However, even though I was the Director of Public Prosecutions for over 12 years after 1997, I was never subjected to any type of pressure from Beijing or by local officials to take particular decisions. When I was criticized, it was invariably by the so-called pan-democrats for deciding on the basis of established prosecutorial criteria not to prosecute particular individuals they disliked, either because they had mainland connections or were prominent in society. And this was the only sort of political pressure that I ever faced in over 12 years. Now, as with the judiciary, the prosecutors have emerged stronger from the challenges they have faced, and they must now build on this, whether by strengthening their expertise, enhancing their transparency, or developing their internal links. Prior to 1997, strangely, prosecutors had very little contact with prosecutors around the world, but this changed in 2001 when the Prosecutions Division joined the International Association of Prosecutors as its 75th organizational member. This opened new doors for the Department of Justice, enabled its prosecutors to forge valuable ties with prosecutors elsewhere, and facilitated the development of effective anti-crime strategies. Going forward, and at a time when the city's legal system is under fire in some Western countries for propaganda purposes, the Department of Justice should enhance its profile in the International Association of Prosecutors and take full advantage of the opportunities afforded by its membership. Everybody needs to hear that prosecutions in Hong Kong are as fair as ever, that nobody is ever prosecuted unless there is a reasonable prospect of conviction on the available evidence, and that the rule of law is as secure as it has ever been. Turning finally, ladies and gentlemen, to the police force, they have, after 1997, faced the greatest challenges of anybody involved in upholding criminal justice. During the social disorder, they were the city's first and last line of defense, and but for them, it could so easily have been ruined. Although in the absence of national security laws, they initially faced great difficulties, they nonetheless displayed professionalism of the highest order, invariably thwarting the rioters with a minimum of force, albeit sustaining multiple injuries themselves in the process. Despite massive provocations, and in the face of incessant fire bombs and other attacks, they achieved wonders in protecting Hong Kong, and they did this without causing any loss of life, which was quite remarkable after months of mayhem. Although the protest movement and its foreign backers did everything possible to demonize the force and undermine its morale, including attacking police married quarters and terrorizing police families, police officers courageously defended Hong Kong in the highest traditions of the force, thereby earning themselves the lasting gratitude of not only the city, but of the entire country. With the enactment of the national security law, the police force now has the tools it needs to protect the city and to defend the country, but more still needs to be done to protect the officers themselves. Throughout the insurrection, police officers regularly had to confront the vilest of insults and abuse, much of it intended to provoke them into overreacting, thus providing footage for the foreign media to gleefully broadcast globally. Of course, under the basic law, everybody enjoys freedom of speech, but as the ICCPR recognizes, necessary restrictions lawfully enacted are legitimate in order, for example, to ensure the rights or reputations of others, to protect national security, or to maintain public order. I firmly believe, therefore, that police officers who expect a certain amount of rough and tumble in their work do not forfeit all their personal rights when engaged in public policing. There can be no absolute right to abuse, insult, or demean a police officer on duty, particularly when this might cause a breach of the peace and endanger the public order. Once troublemakers start throwing abuse around, there is, as we saw in 2019, a real possibility that tensions will escalate, thereby impacting adversely on effective law enforcement activities. Over the years, there has been sporadic talk of criminalizing obnoxious conduct of this type, and it is surely time to provide police officers, and indeed other law enforcement officers as well, with the protections they need from vile abuse when discharging their public responsibilities. After all, this has been achieved in places like France and Singapore, and their models can now provide valuable guidance for Hong Kong. The police force also needs to be protected from fake news, a type of propaganda. In 2019, fake news was a powerful tool in the hands of those seeking to harm the city and alarm its people. In particular, false reports of wrongdoings by the police force appeared almost daily on the internet, and some journalists, instead of giving them a wide berth, eagerly provided them with oxygen. Malicious reports designed to weaken morale at the very time that the police officers were trying to protect the city were constantly aired, including by RTHK. When challenged, media representatives, oblivious to the harm they were doing, waffled away about freedom of the press and balanced pictures, but never about public responsibility. It was almost as if the allegations of the protest movement, however ludicrous, were sacrosanct and had to be placed in the public domain, regardless of the consequences. After, for example, the protest movement claimed that police officers had killed protesters at an MTR station, raped women in custody, tortured suspects, drowned a student protester, and blinded an activist, these and other fallacies were eagerly recycled by the media. Although the claims were spurious, they delighted the foreign media and were seized upon by everybody in the West who wanted to undermine the police force and malign the government. On the streets, the fallacies were used to whip up anti-police feeling, thereby fueling further black-clad violence, and 600 police officers were assaulted during the riots, including the officers who were doused in corrosive liquid, ignited when hit by petrol bombs, and knifed when going off duty. So fake news was deliberately used to stimulate hatred of the police force, and this often made it harder for the police to enforce the law, which was the intention of those responsible. And I believe that no responsible society can tolerate the dissemination of falsehoods that cause hatred of the authorities, divide society, and promote criminal objectives. Of course, under the national security law, the city is required, quote, to take all necessary measures to strengthen guidance, supervision, and regulation over matters concerning national security, including those relating to the media and the internet, that's Article 9. But even without this, the need for legislation to control fake news is blindingly obvious. And let nobody ever forget, Hong Kong had a very narrow escape in 2019, and the one country, two systems policy was almost destroyed, with fake news having played a significant part. The right of freedom of expression, whether oral or written, is not absolute, and restrictions may by law be imposed for good reason. Quite clearly, there are red lines that should not be crossed, and people who are concerned about freedom of expression need to understand that the best way of protecting it is by using it responsibly. In determining the way forward, Singapore, which enacted its own fake news law in 2019, called the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, has provided a useful template for Hong Kong. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, it can be seen that the judiciary, the prosecutions division, and the police force have all faced great challenges since 1997, and they have all learnt from their experiences and emerged stronger. This, I believe, will assist them greatly over the next 25 years and will contribute decisively to the success of the one country, two systems policy. In order to achieve their full potential, however, they will need every support, and this must be forthcoming, as it will strengthen our most important asset, namely the rule of law. Thank you very much.
非常感谢江乐士先生。Thank you very much, Mr. Ian Grivion-Gross. 下面有请全国港澳研究会副会长、香港中文大学社会学荣休讲座教授刘兆佳先生发言。Next, let us welcome Mr. Lau Siu Kai, Vice President of the Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies and Emeritus Professor of Sociology of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Well, one country, two systems is a primary practical and wise national policy devised by the Beijing, that is the central authorities, to achieve the nation's peaceful reunification and maintain Hong Kong's prosperity and stability after its return to the motherland. Even though Beijing, having sovereignty over Hong Kong, enjoys comprehensive jurisdiction over the city, Hong Kong, however, is delegated wide-ranging powers to enable it to exercise a high degree of autonomy. Understandably and naturally, Beijing still retains a batch of constitutional powers coming from the national constitution and the basic law to ensure, inter alia, the national security is protected. One country, two systems in Hong Kong is comprehensively and accurately practiced. The basic law is correctly interpreted and executed. The political institutions of Hong Kong are compatible with the needs and purposes of one country, two systems, and the chief executive and principal officials are fully accountable to the central government. In retrospect, the success of one country, two systems in Hong Kong owes immensely to Beijing's faithful and impeccable fulfillment of its obligations under one country, two systems, and the prudent exercise of its constitutional powers. Arguably, since Beijing bears ultimate and inescapable responsibility for the success of one country, two systems, the powers are exercised mainly to fulfill its solemn obligations to the nation and Hong Kong. All along, Beijing is determined and sincere in fulfilling its obligations under one country, two systems. Beijing, for example, has, in conformity with the Sino-British Joint Declaration, stipulated the basic policies of the People's Republic of China regarding Hong Kong and the elaboration of them in Annex 1 to the Joint Declaration in the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region of the People's Republic of China by the National People's Republic of China, and they will remain unchanged for 50 years. It should be noted that Beijing's basic policies toward Hong Kong were made by Beijing alone and had nothing to do with the British. The promulgation of the Basic Law in April 1990 pushed further than Annex 1 in conferring rights and privileges to the Hong Kong residents, undeniably demonstrates that China has completely fulfilled her obligations under the Joint Declaration. And thereafter, the Joint Declaration has become a historical document without legal effect. Over the years, until recently, Beijing has been very cautious, restrained, and conscientious in using its constitutional powers. Beijing exercised tremendous patience and displayed much magnanimity in face of the relentless provocations and assaults by the anti-China elements in Hong Kong and their foreign patrons. The Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, while aware of and worried about widespread misunderstanding and deliberate misinterpretation of the Basic Law in Hong Kong. Even among lawyers and judges, had only reluctantly interpreted the Basic Law 5 times after other means to settle the crucial controversies over the Basic Law were exhausted. While Beijing's interpretations of the Basic Law had drawn a lot of fire from the anti-China forces, they were by and large seen by many Hong Kong people as Beijing stepping forward to resolve Hong Kong's difficulties. The most notable instance took place in 1999, when Beijing interpreted the articles in the Basic Law about the right of abode, overturned the Court of Final Appeal's interpretation, and averted a massive influx of mainland residents into Hong Kong. Since constitutionally, Beijing is the ultimate authority in the interpretation of the Basic Law, its self-restraint in exercising the power of interpretation showed that Beijing was determined not to be criticized as overbearing or as trying to serve political ends through legal means. To maintain political stability in Hong Kong and to reassure the hypersensitive Hong Kong residents, Beijing decided to transfer the responsibility to enact laws to safeguard national security, a responsibility commonly borne by the central government, to Hong Kong. Beijing is fully aware and naturally nervous about the adverse consequences of such a decision, given the openness and the porousness of the Hong Kong society and the presence of numerous antagonistic foreign forces and their local agents in the city. What happened subsequently in Hong Kong was that Article 23 of the Basic Law, which is about safeguarding national security, had failed to be locally enacted because of the obstruction of the political opposition and their followers. Even so, Beijing had no intention to claw back from Hong Kong the privileges of making local laws to protect national security, thus leaving many lacunas in the national security legislation in Hong Kong and making the city a potential source of national security threat. During the transitional period before Hong Kong's return to the main motherland, the departing colonial government had unilaterally introduced, without consulting Beijing and obtaining its approval, elections for the legislature. Part of it was even popularly elected. This decolonization project on the part of the British purported to enable the anti-China forces in Hong Kong to enter the legislature and to build up a mayor space. While Beijing was able to reverse some of the electoral arrangements afterward, still, the anti-China elements in the legislature were allowed to stay because of the lack of robust political screening mechanism. Though in a minority position, the anti-China legislators were able to deploy a lot of obstructionist tactics to make the life of the Hong Kong government difficult and render effective governance impossible. Such a strange executive-legislative relationship ran afoul of the legislative intentions of the Basic Law, as the Basic Law drafters back in the late 1980s were earnestly toiling for a cooperative relationship between the two bodies. Though owing only the constitutional power to establish and change Hong Kong's political institutions, Beijing, concerned about possible political repercussions, did not see fit to reshape Hong Kong's electoral system. Instead, Beijing hoped that the anti-China opposition would eventually see the light and abandon their confrontational stance toward Beijing. Regrettably, Beijing's goodwill, forbearance, and self-discipline were not reciprocated, and instead were misunderstood as signs of weakness and timidity by a lot of Hong Kong residents, particularly by the political opposition. Beijing's hands-off approach toward toward Hong Kong had the opposite effect of encouraging the anti-China forces to whet the political appetite. They spared no effort to stir up anti-communist, anti-China, and anti-government fervor among the Hong Kong residents, mobilizing and organizing them into interminable protest actions. They shrewdly manipulated the issue of political reform and succeeded in perennially putting it at the top of the public agenda, amassing substantial political capital in the process. Their final goal was to seize more and more political power and hopefully, with Beijing's tacit and reluctant approval, gain the right and power to run Hong Kong. All these dire political developments in Hong Kong came to a head in the past decade. The Occupy Central protest and the 2019-2020 insurrection being the most glaring examples of Hong Kong on the precipice. The protesters have become increasingly radical, both in rhetoric and tactics. Various forms of separatism and localism were advocated, the most pernicious being the call for Hong Kong independence. The constitutional order, made up of the national constitution and the basic law, was rejected, defied, and trampled upon. Violence prevailed and law violations abundant. Society was sharply divided and politicized. The disintegration of the political order made day-to-day governance extremely difficult. Most flattening was that the external forces, particularly those from the West and Taiwan, were deeply implicated in Hong Kong's unprecedented turmoil. All of these happened in the context of deficiencies in national security legislation in Hong Kong and intensifying all-out containment of a rising China by the United States and its Western allies. In these grim circumstances, not only was national security under serious threat, but the viability and the future of one country, two systems were hanging in the balance. From Beijing's point of view, the Hong Kong government was no match for the coalition of internal and external hostile forces. However hesitant Beijing was about intervening in Hong Kong affairs, it perforce had to act quickly, decisively, and powerfully. Hong Kong and one country, two systems could only be rescued by the forceful exercise of the constitutional powers of Beijing. Beijing thus moved speedily to pass the Hong Kong National Security Law and drastically revamp the electoral system of Hong Kong. Very quickly, the insurrection was suppressed and the anti-China forces vanquished. The actions of Beijing were authorized by both the national constitution and the basic law and in line with the principle of Beijing being the ultimate guardian of national security and one country, two systems. Fortunately for Hong Kong and the nation, notwithstanding the granting of a high degree of autonomy to Hong Kong, Beijing has never given up the prerogatives of legislating for Hong Kong via national laws and deciding on Hong Kong's political institutions. Since Hong Kong's return to the motherland, Hong Kong has gone through many big and small crises. In most crises, Beijing prefers to take a hands-off stance, abiding strictly and faithfully by the principle of respecting Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. Nevertheless, Deng Xiaoping was sagacious to foresee back in the 1980s that in some cases, Beijing had to intervene because Hong Kong could not solve the problem on its own. Therefore, said Deng Xiaoping, having Beijing holding on to some constitutional powers would benefit both Hong Kong and the nation. From the perspective of the implementation of one country, two systems, the crisis in Hong Kong in the last several years testify vividly that the retention of some constitutional powers in the hands of Beijing is critical not only to the comprehensive and accurate implementation of one country, two systems, but also to its survival under some circumstances. The powers at the disposal of Beijing will not only not undermine Hong Kong's autonomy, but instead will strengthen its autonomy against the onslaught from internal and external hostile forces. Despite the inexorable demise of anti-China forces in Hong Kong, external forces such as the United States and the West are expected to persist in their adversarial stance toward China and Hong Kong. National security and Hong Kong's stability will continue to be under serious threat. The active but prudent exercise of Beijing's constitutional powers over Hong Kong is necessary to protect one country, two systems, and prevent Hong Kong from becoming a base of subversion. Unavoidably, Beijing's legitimate and indispensable participation in Hong Kong's affairs has been denounced by critics with ulterior motives as undermining Hong Kong's autonomy. Still, in the days ahead, it is obvious that only with Beijing's constitutional powers and the powers delegated to Hong Kong working in tandem can the success of one country, two systems be fully guaranteed. That's my end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lau Shika. 下面有请美国库恩基金会主席、中国改革有益奖章获得者罗伯特·库恩先生发表视频致辞。And now we're pleased to have Mr. Robert Kuhn, Chairman of the Kuhn Foundation in the United States and the recipient of the China Reform Friendship Medal, to deliver his video speech.
各位来宾，朋友们，你们好。It is a pleasure to participate in the Bahenia Culture International Symposium on the achievements and future of one country, two systems. Of all the topics I think I know well, I do not count Hong Kong. Although I visit Hong Kong, have Hong Kong friends, and research Hong Kong for my writings, for example, its repatriation to China and the Asian financial crisis, both in 1997, and the recent visionary Greater Bay Area Coordinated Development Plan, I do not know Hong Kong like I know Beijing. That's why I'm often reluctant, at least initially, to accept interview requests from the international media about Hong Kong. If I could not speak authoritatively, or at least confidently, I should not speak at all. But as Hong Kong's situation kept changing, from the protest movements to the national security law, and the requests kept coming, I began to consider what I do know. I know how China's leaders think. In writing my book, How China's Leaders Think, I spoke with dozens of Chinese leaders and officials, including then Zhejiang Party Secretary Xi Jinping, who advised me to think about China both horizontally in its great geographic diversity and vertically in its long civilization history. And indeed, over the years, I've come to have a better understanding of why Hong Kong is important to China. While understandably criticizing the clampdown on free speech, Westerners should at least try to understand from China's point of view why Hong Kong is so vitally important to China. When I'm interviewed on Hong Kong, I begin with this same basic question: why is Hong Kong so vitally important to China? I offer 5 reasons, 2 economic, 3 political. The first is that Hong Kong has been the gateway for doing business in China, facilitating reform and opening up and catalyzing the country's economic miracle. But with the rise of mainland markets, exemplified by Shanghai and Shenzhen, Hong Kong's unique role has diminished. The second economic reason is the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area, a central strategy for transforming China's economy via coordinated development, and here Hong Kong energizes regional integration. The Greater Bay Area GDP is more than $1.7 trillion, about 12% of China's total GDP, and it is projected to reach around $3.5 trillion by 2030. If the Greater Bay Area were a country, an independent country, its GDP would rank almost in the world's top 10. The first political reason of Hong Kong's importance to China is that it exemplifies the one country, two systems policy that enables Hong Kong's special status, and which at some point Beijing seeks to apply to Taiwan. The second is that Hong Kong represents China's historic reclamation, after over a century of oppression and humiliation, of global presence and import. Hong Kong's return to China has promoted national pride, as well as it should, just as its prior colonization was part of China's century of humiliation. The third reason is that Hong Kong as a leading world city reflects China's international image and soft power. Writing in 2019 at the height of the protests, I repeatedly said that China's central government seeks the best for Hong Kong, but on China's own terms, and that China prioritizes national security and social stability, which are essential for economic development, and rule of law, which is essential for social development. Beijing will defer to the local Hong Kong government as much as possible and as long as possible, I said at the time, thus sustaining the one country, two systems policy. But there are three red lines, I said at the time, that cannot be crossed. One, movement toward Hong Kong independence, or even quasi-independence, which includes wholly open one-person, one-vote elections for local leaders. Two, using Hong Kong to try to undermine the mainland's party-led political system. And three, unending chaos, such that Hong Kong's economic viability would be threatened. I continue to say that China's central government will make the absolute minimum interventions necessary to safeguard these three red lines, but they will, under all circumstances, safeguard them. As the Hong Kong protests escalated, so did the Beijing rhetoric, and then commencing formal action culminating in the national security law. Chaos in China is said to be the enemy of the people. And as the People's Daily Commentary asserted at the time, if they, meaning the protesters, are allowed to trample on the rule of law in Hong Kong, then Hong Kong's advantages and Hong Kong's competitiveness will be eroded. Given interconnectedness, as China saw it, the protests in Hong Kong could not be much quarantine from all of China, where stability has been the foundation for reform and development. Moreover, in his domestic policy, President Xi's pledge to promote common prosperity, a multi-decade grand vision for which stability is essential. Now, if social protests, or even as China would put it, turmoil in Hong Kong seems unrelated to, say, poverty alleviation on the mainland, this is the crux of the matter as seen by China's leaders. Let me explain. For several years, I've been focusing on President Xi's targeted poverty alleviation campaign. I co-produced, wrote, and hosted a documentary, Voices from the Front Line, China's War on Poverty. China's broad economic growth had lifted over 800 million Chinese people out of poverty, the greatest developmental success story in human history. But in late 2012, when Xi Jinping became China's senior leader, there were still about 100 million Chinese who would remain intractably poor, no matter how high the GDP per capita. And this was due to living in remote mountain villages mainly, or health issues and the like. Xi Jinping asserted that China could not claim to be a moderately prosperous society, by 2020, China's first national goal, if any of its citizens lived below the line of absolute poverty. Hence, President Xi mobilized the party and the country to fight poverty and eradicated all extreme poverty by the end of 2020. Although relative poverty remains a major issue, and progress toward common prosperity is a multi-decade commitment. Who can deny that China's astounding success in poverty alleviation is related to political stability and party leadership? 5 levels of local party secretaries fought extreme poverty, the provincial, municipal, county, township, and village levels. Party officials could not be promoted unless and until they fulfilled their specific numeric poverty alleviation goals. I watched local officials being held accountable, sweating, their careers at stake. All forms of governance systems have trade-offs, and only collective human wisdom can discern what is optimum for each social group under its own conditions at its own times. But I'm rather confident that under China's conditions, and in these times, the vast majority of those hundreds of millions of Chinese who have been lifted out of extreme poverty would be pleased that political stability enabled economic development and party leadership delivered poverty alleviation. Looking forward, Hong Kong is China and will remain China. The challenge for Chinese wisdom is to see what it will take long-term to secure the kind of robust stability that empowers, that does not squelch, creative, dynamic, knowledge-based development for the benefit of all. Hong Kong has long been an essential venue for foreign technology and capital to enter mainland China. How can now Hong Kong become the vehicle to attract to the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area the highest level sophisticated foreigners, not just in finance, but also in science and technology, advanced biomedical and healthcare, advanced design, and business entrepreneurship? Hong Kong has great opportunities. But to turn these opportunities into real development, I offer two pieces of advice. First, please preserve Hong Kong's freedom of access to information, particularly online. And second, please do not restrict Hong Kong experts from interacting freely with their peers in other countries. Hong Kong has significant new potential, which could be attenuated if information is restricted and expert interaction is limited. The best people in diverse fields cannot tolerate barriers to information and constraints on their professional associations. Hong Kong indeed has great potential. Hong Kong is a unique city for China and for the world. 谢谢你们。
Thank you very much, Mr. Kuhn. 下面有请全国人大常委会香港特别行政区基本法委员会委员陈弘毅先生发言。Now please welcome Mr. Albert H.Y. Chen, member of the Hong Kong Basic Law Committee of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure to speak to you today on the topic of the evolving constitutional order of one country, two systems. One country, two systems is an innovative constitutional arrangement designed by the late Deng Xiaoping for the purpose of securing the reunification of colonial Hong Kong with the motherland. The basic principles and features of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region under one country, two systems were specified first in the Sino-British Declaration of 1984, and then in greater detail in the Basic Law of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, enacted by the National People's Congress in the year 1990. The Basic Law was drafted on the basis of two basic principles: the principle of Chinese sovereignty over Hong Kong and the principle of Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy, with Hong Kong people ruling Hong Kong. The Basic Law confers on the executive, legislative, and judicial organs of the Hong Kong SAR extensive powers. These powers cover a wide range of subject matters that include almost all policy domains, with the exception of defense and foreign affairs. Even within the sphere of foreign affairs, the Hong Kong SAR is granted considerable powers over external affairs. For example, Hong Kong can, using the name of Hong Kong, China, participate in the WTO and in the Olympics. It can also enter into international agreements with other states on matters such as commerce, trade, and investment, reciprocal recognition and enforcement of arbitrary awards, and even extradition of fugitive offenders. At the same time, the Basic Law also provides for the powers which the central government may exercise with regard to Hong Kong, such as the power to appoint the chief executive after his or her election by a local election committee, the power to apply national laws to Hong Kong on matters outside Hong Kong's autonomy, and the power to interpret and amend the Basic Law. The Basic Law also contains two important provisions, which in retrospect shaped post-97 developments in the Hong Kong SAR. The first provision is Article 23 of the Basic Law, which both requires and empowers the Hong Kong SAR to make laws to protect China's national security, such as laws on treason, sedition, subversion, secession, etc. The second provision is that which regulates the direction of development of Hong Kong's political system. Although the colonial political system was by no means democratic, the draftsmen of the Basic Law responded positively to the aspirations for democratization expressed by many people in Hong Kong during the consultative process for the drafting of the Basic Law in the late 1980s. Thus, the Basic Law provides that the ultimate direction of development of the political system in the Hong Kong SAR would be towards the realization of universal suffrage in the election of the chief executive and of all legislators. As is well known, the Hong Kong government's attempt to legislate to implement Article 23 failed in 2003 because of strong public opposition led by the so-called pan-democrats. And the issue of national security legislation became so politically sensitive and such a cause for concern and phobia that none of the chief executives since 2005 took any step to legislate on Article 23. Meanwhile, the Basic Law provisions on universal suffrage gave rise to aspirations for democratization. The pan-democratic political parties lobbied for the speedy introduction of universal suffrage. But when the Chinese and Hong Kong governments finally put forward a model for the election of the chief executive in accordance with Article 45 of the Basic Law, a model for the election of the chief executive by universal suffrage, this electoral reform plan was opposed by the Occupy Central movement in 2014 and eventually rejected by the pan-democrats in the legislature in 2015 on the ground that the proposed nomination procedure for candidates were not democratic enough. Actually, Article 45 of the Basic Law provides expressly that candidates for election of the chief executive by universal suffrage should be nominated by a nominating committee, and the model put forward by the Chinese government of nomination of candidates by a nominating committee was consistent with Article 45. Increasing social and political conflicts in Hong Kong culminated in the anti-extradition bill movement of 2019, which, as is well known, resulted in many months of riots and civil unrest that persisted despite the suspension and subsequent withdrawal of the extradition bill. The central authorities considered the social movement akin to color revolutions elsewhere that were supported by Western states and decided that the loophole in Hong Kong's legal system regarding the lack of protection of national security needed to be plugged. Hence, the enactment of the National Security Law in 2020. The central authorities then took steps in 2021 to reform the electoral system provided for in Annexes 1 and 2 of the Basic Law. The declared purpose of the reform was to provide institutional safeguards for the realization of the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong, first enunciated by Deng Xiaoping in the late 1980s. It was hoped that this reform would put an end to the political instability and conflicts, chronic filibuster in the legislature, and frequent anti-China mobilization of the public that have plagued post-97 Hong Kong for years and prevented the original design of effective executive-led government from being realized. I believe that the central authorities were well-intentioned, both when the Basic Law was drafted and in the course of the implementation of the Basic Law. For example, at the time of the drafting of the Basic Law, it was considered that the Chinese laws on matters of national security, which were those that prohibited counter-revolutionary activities at the time, were not suitable for application in the Hong Kong SAR, in which socialism would not be practiced. The Hong Kong SAR should therefore make its own laws to protect China's national security. So in 2003, the introduction by the Hong Kong SAR government of a national security bill was for the purpose of performing Hong Kong's constitutional duty under Article 23 of the Basic Law. The bill was actually certified by Lord Pennick, QC, a leading British legal expert on human rights, as being consistent with the international human rights standards in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Yet the political opposition in Hong Kong demonized the bill and mobilized public opposition to it, which resulted eventually in the bill being withdrawn. Despite this, the central government continued to respect Hong Kong's autonomy and had not issued any direction to any subsequent chief executives to revive the legislative exercise on Article 23 at any specific point in time. On the contrary, Beijing in the year 2007 agreed to set a timetable and actually set the timetable for the realization of universal suffrage in the Hong Kong SAR, even before it discharged its constitutional obligation to legislate on Article 23. I believe the central authorities were also well-intentioned when they, in the year 2014, put forward an electoral model for the election of the chief executive by universal suffrage. Unfortunately, the electoral reform plan failed to materialize as a result of the opposition by the pan-democrats. Afterwards, some opposition politicians and activists were radicalized and began to challenge or deviate from the one-country principle of one country, two systems. They even resorted to large-scale and unrelenting violence during the anti-extradition bill movement. In response to these circumstances, the central authorities introduced the National Security Law and the Electoral Reform of 2021 with the objective of steering the practice of one country, two systems back to its right track. Actually, it was obvious from the circumstances in Hong Kong in 2019 that the train journey of one country, two systems had been derailed. Without firm and decisive actions on the part of the central authorities, it was difficult to see how one country, two systems could continue to have any future. I think most reasonable people would agree that at this 25th anniversary of the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR, Hong Kong is better off, much better off than it was in 2019. So let us hope that the restored social and political stability in Hong Kong will continue and that economic prosperity will grow further, particularly after the pandemic subsides. Like the other speakers at this conference, and like members of the audience here, I also have hope and faith in the future of Hong Kong under one country, two systems. Thank you.
谢谢陈弘毅先生。最后有请大紫金勋衔香港兰桂坊集团主席盛智文先生发言。Last but not least, let's welcome Mr. Alan Zeman, GBM, Chairman of the Lan Kwai Fong Group in Hong Kong, to deliver his speech. Please.
Well, Mr. Mao Chaofeng, Mr. Wen, and Mr. Liu Guangyan, and my fellow speakers. I stand here today. It's my unparalleled pleasure to be invited and speak for the Bohemia Culture International Symposium on the achievements and future of One Country, Two Systems. Now, just for your information, I've never read a speech before. I usually just speak like that, but I was told I have to write a speech, so I'm reading it now. As we all know, One Country, Two Systems was an unprecedented concept created by the respectable Mr. Deng Xiaoping in the 80s for the smooth and peaceful rectification of Hong Kong. Now, One Country, Two Systems was basically an experiment that has never been done before anywhere in the world. And I still remember in 1997 when it was implemented, many people, the biggest mistake that Hong Kong made was that we did not have national education. We decided at that time, the powers that be decided to do liberal studies. Teachers could teach whatever they wanted. And that was a big mistake, because at the beginning of 1997, many people, young people, old people, many said, I'm not Chinese, I'm Hong Kongese. Many said, I'm Hong Kongese, I'm not Hong Kongese, I'm British. Many said, I'm not British, I'm American. And so there was confusion for the last 25 years until 2020. And with the 25 years of implementation, the essence of One Country, Two Systems remains unchanged, but One Country, Two Systems continues to evolve, enhance, and enrich over the years, catering the actual needs and situation of Hong Kong. I honestly believe that One Country, Two Systems isn't just a preset principle, it is a living principle which provides the best foundation for Hong Kong as an energetic and bustling international city, an international financial center. Over the years, Hong Kong has faced different kinds of challenges and crises. Yet One Country, Two Systems has provided us the strongest foundation and backup from China, helping us to counteract and overcome negative impacts we encountered as an open economy. With the legislation and implementation of the national security law, overseas media and foreign investors in town expressed their concerns. They all expressed their concerns at the time. They feared that Hong Kong's stability, prosperity, and uniqueness would be fading away. But actually, the national security law was really one of the saviors that created stability in Hong Kong. I remember in 2019, everybody was very nervous, business could not function, people were leaving Hong Kong, and it was a real problem. But in essence, what Beijing did was quietly wrote a national security law, which really they implemented in 2020 and was criticized by all the Western media. Hong Kong, China taking back Hong Kong through a national security law. Now, how wrong was that? Out of 200 countries around the world, 120 countries have a security law. Well, what's wrong with Hong Kong? Why can't we have a security law? And the security law, at the end of the day, brought stability back to Hong Kong. And we can see the results up to now. People have been able to do business here. It's attracted people back to Hong Kong, and it's created a foundation for One Country, Two Systems to continue to evolve. And yet, over the last few months, it has proven that national security law doesn't hamper rights and freedoms of our citizens. Instead, it has provided the best protection to our people by restoring peace, order, and security to Hong Kong. As I shared with the media on numerous occasions, many of my foreign friends regained their confidence and trust in the city with the return of peace and order. Nevertheless, the COVID pandemic has thrown us into another turbulence of turmoil. This pandemic poses unprecedented challenges to Hong Kong, not only in public health, but also in our economy and one country, two systems as a whole. I am glad that my sincere suggestions had been well received, not just by the chief executive herself, but also the general public of Hong Kong. Right now, Hong Kong finally is starting to open up again to the international world, and people are regaining confidence again. Hopefully, this will bring Hong Kong back to the right track, not just for rebooting our businesses, but also for upholding one country, two systems. When speaking of upholding one country, two systems, many would bring up the discussion on the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. President Xi Jinping has explicitly indicated that to ensure the steadfast and successful implementation of one country, two systems, we must adhere to the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. Once again, some overseas media slandered Hong Kong, saying that this principle would further jeopardize one country, two systems. Nevertheless, this principle is fundamental to national security, sovereignty, development interests, as well as the long-term prosperity and stability of Hong Kong. Only through patriots administering Hong Kong can the central authorities' overall jurisdiction over Hong Kong be effectively implemented and the constitutional order established by the Constitution and the Basic Law be effectively safeguarded, various deep-seated problems be effectively resolved, and the long-term stability and safety of Hong Kong be achieved. And I can tell you, with patriots ruling Hong Kong, this is something that has put the train back on the track. Because in the past, Hong Kong was stuck. The Basic Law, at that time, Hong Kong was stuck. And the reason being that LegCo was divided between the pan-Democrats and the pro-Beijing. No bill could get passed. Every bill took 2 months, 3 months, up to 6 months. Something called filibuster. I learned a new word called filibuster. And bills could not get passed. China realized that this was one of the flaws of one country, two systems. We needed to unblock the blockage because LegCo is the engine that drives Hong Kong, that is able to allow laws to be passed, bills to get passed, and finance to get into the hands of the public to make the life of the people better. But by blocking it, these pan-Democrats were not, LegCo didn't function. Suddenly, China put in that we need to look after people being patriotic, that are going to sit in LegCo and sit in other parts of the government. That has really enabled now LegCo to start functioning again and being able to pass bills on time and really to enhance the lives of the people of Hong Kong. And this is why, the reason why I repeatedly speak to overseas media that China needs a strong international Hong Kong, because the overseas countries, the West, is always saying that China is taking back Hong Kong, and this is the end of Hong Kong. But that's not correct, because basically China has 1.4 billion people. Hong Kong has 7.5 million people. Hong Kong is important to China because we are the superconnector between the West and the East and the West. And China needs, we're an international financial center. China needs Hong Kong as an international financial center, not just another Chinese city. And this is something that is very, very important. So I say this is the reason why I repeatedly speak to overseas media that China needs a strong international Hong Kong, and so Hong Kong would never be another 7.5 million people strong Chinese cities. Thus, there is no way China won't help strengthen and uphold one country, two systems in Hong Kong, since this is the essence to keep Hong Kong as the superconnector for the West to the East and the East to the West. Whenever overseas critics attack one country, two systems, I explain to them that the implementation of one country, two systems is absolutely essential and successful in Hong Kong. In addition, rule of law, freedom and human rights, all these core values cherished by local society prevail and are still enjoyed by the public of Hong Kong. What's more, the new CE elected Mr. John Lee has also committed in his election manifesto that he will capitalize on Hong Kong's strong foundation of the rule of law and safeguard judicial independence. With my previous working experience with John, he is a man of his word, and his result-oriented administrating philosophy has conveyed a strong message to Hong Kong citizens. He will do his utmost to bring Hong Kong back on track. Just look at his proposal for adding 3 new deputy secretaries, particularly the Deputy Secretary for Justice. He says he wants the Secretary for Justice and the Deputy to go out to explain in full the legal system in Hong Kong and the rule of law and the independent judiciary in Hong Kong, so as to let people know the true picture of Hong Kong, particularly when we have been badmouthed by some politicians for political reasons, criticizing unfairly the system that is being practiced in Hong Kong. Frankly speaking, this is of paramount importance to Hong Kong, not just for upholding one country, two systems, but also let the world know that one country, two systems is genuinely implemented in Hong Kong. This is the only way to restore Hong Kong's image and reputation in the international world. We're in the midst of a Cold War at the moment, and this is really hurting China and the West. And basically, we're back to that. Hong Kong is collateral damage because of that. We're being thrown into it. And I think that it's very, very important that, that now we go ahead and explain the benefits of one country, two systems to the world. Looking forward with further reforms and opening up of the Chinese mainland, Hong Kong's advantage will be enhanced with the successful implementation of one country, two systems. Hong Kong will further integrate into China's national development. In other words, Hong Kong as a city under one country, two systems will be able to put our uniqueness into full play by creating special impact in the Greater Bay Area, no matter in legal, innovative, technology, or catering sectors, etc. With my years spending in Hong Kong, knowing this place and its people, I'm sure Hong Kong will definitely find out its own way to work together with other cities in the Greater Bay Area with all of those opportunities lying ahead. Now, the Greater Bay Area, we're talking about 11 cities, Hong Kong, Macau, Shenzhen, and Guangzhou, the 4 key cities of the 11. And the future is the Greater Bay Area. The future for Hong Kong is the Greater Bay Area. You're talking about 11 cities, all with high-speed rail, 1.5 hours away from Hong Kong, and a population of 84 million people versus 7.5 million people of Hong Kong. GDP last year of $1.8 trillion US dollars. Now, as other speakers have said, this is one of the top 10 GDPs in the world if it was a country on its own. And so you can imagine the future of Hong Kong. The future is very, very bright, and that will continue. And just like what Mr. Tung Chee-hwa said in the past, the better China is, the greater Hong Kong is. I would say this line still applies perfectly today. The stronger China is, the more opportunities Hong Kong can enjoy. Hong Kong will certainly be back and be strong and prosperous again. And all these lie in one basic foundation. For example, the one country, two systems of Hong Kong. I hope the younger generation and talents around the world can take me and my experience at their reference. Hong Kong has always been a place full of opportunities. I can trust Hong Kong and I can trust China, since I, for one, experienced and know how this place and this country, after spending most of my life here, I've been here for 50 years, and I wouldn't live anywhere else in the world. Hong Kong is the best place. In the past, people in the East looked for opportunity in the West. But time has changed, and so does our world. China is the future. And if we have all sorts of opportunities in Hong Kong, just get your tickets like what I did and came to Hong Kong when I was 19 years old. I know previously many left Hong Kong, but with John Lee and his government, Hong Kong will come back and be even bigger and stronger under one country, two systems. I say come and check with your own eyes. Share and enjoy the great opportunity here in Hong Kong. And I now believe with patriots ruling Hong Kong that the next 25 years will be the strongest ever. We've ironed out all the kinks from the last 25 years, all the problems, the protests, the inability of people to understand the system and all that. Now that we've learned for 25 years, the future 25 years will be the strongest growth Hong Kong has ever seen. And especially as China grows, Hong Kong will grow. Thank you very, very much, and enjoy your lunch.
好的，非常感谢盛智文先生的精彩发言。
让我们再次以热烈掌声对以上所有的发言嘉宾致以真诚的感谢，谢谢他们今天的参与和发言。
谢谢，谢谢你们。各位嘉宾、女士们、先生们，上午的论坛一直到此结束。参加午餐的嘉宾，请到我们指定餐厅就餐。下午2点开始我们今天的主题论坛和分论坛。谢谢大家。
谢谢。